Welcome back. Village life may seem quiet, but murder always finds its way in. In the drowsy heart of St. Mary Mead, where roses bloomed with secrets and teacups held more than mere refreshment, the garden club gathered under a veneer of civility, their smiles as brittle as the porcelain in their hands. Amid the fragrant blooms and polite chatter, a single cup, delicate, adorned with forget-me-nots, waited to betray its drinker, its contents laced with a silent promise of death. Who among these genteel souls, with their petty rivalries and hidden passions, had stirred poison into the brew? The answer lay not in the sunlight that dappled the gazebo, but in the shadows cast by human hearts, where motives twisted like ivy, ready to choke the unwary. Chapter 1. The Garden Club Gathering. The village of St. Mary Mead lay nestled in the gentle folds of the English countryside, a place where time seemed to move at the leisurely pace of a bumblebee, drifting from bloom to bloom. Its thatched cottages, with their climbing roses and neatly trimmed hedges, spoke of an enduring tranquility that belied the undercurrents of human passion simmering beneath the surface. On this particular afternoon in late spring, the air was perfumed with the scent of lilacs and freshly turned earth, and the sun cast a golden haze over the landscape, turning the leaves to shimmering emeralds. It was the kind of day that invited one to linger outdoors, to admire the handiwork of nature, and perhaps to indulge in a spot of genteel rivalry among neighbors. Rosewood Manor stood at the edge of the village, a gracious Georgian house with ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows that overlooked expansive gardens. These gardens were the pride of Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, the manor's formidable mistress and the undisputed president of the St. Mary Mead Garden Club. For over 2 decades, Mrs. Hargrove had ruled the club with an iron fist sheathed in a velvet glove, her decisions on matters floral, as final as those of a magistrate in his court. The annual flower show was her crowning glory, an event that drew entrants from neighboring villages and even, on occasion, from as far afield as the county town. This year, preparations were in full swing, and the club members had gathered at Rosewood for their monthly meeting, which traditionally culminated in an afternoon tea served amid the blooming borders. The gardens themselves were a testament to Mrs. Hargrove's meticulous nature. Paths of crushed gravel wound between beds of vibrant perennials, delphiniums spiking upward like blue sentinels, peonies unfurling their ruffled petals in shades of pink and cream, and borders of lavender humming with bees. In the center stood an ornate gazebo, its latticework entwined with wisteria, providing shade for the tea table that had been set up with exquisite care. Crisp white linens draped the table, upon which rested a silver tea service gleaming in the sunlight, flanked by platters of cucumber sandwiches, scones with clotted cream and strawberry jam, and an assortment of delicate pastries. Bone china cups, each patterned with forget-me-nots, awaited the guests, and a large urn of hot water bubbled gently on a side table, ready for the brewing of Mrs. Hargrove's favored Darjeeling blend. Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove herself was a woman of imposing presence, tall and straight-backed, with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, and eyes as sharp as pruning shears. At 65, she carried herself with the authority of one who had long ago mastered the art of command. Her dress was a subdued lavender silk, adorned with a brooch of antique pearls, and she moved among her guests with the grace of a hostess who knew her domain intimately. Yet there was a hardness about her mouth, a faint line of disapproval that suggested she tolerated imperfection only as a necessary evil in others. She had inherited Rosewood from her late husband, a prosperous solicitor who had passed away under circumstances that were whispered about but never openly discussed. A sudden heart attack during a heated argument, some said, though the coroner had ruled it natural causes. Among the assembled guests was Mr. Reginald Potts, the club's vice president, a man in his early 50s with a florid complexion and a mustache that he twirled absently when deep in thought. Potts was a retired bank manager who had taken up gardening with the fervor of a convert, his own plot in the village renowned for its exotic orchids, which he nurtured in a heated greenhouse. Ambitious by nature, he had his eye on the presidency, a fact not lost on Mrs. Hargrove, who viewed his innovations, such as introducing hybrid varieties from abroad, with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. "Tradition, my dear Potts," she had once admonished him during a meeting, "is the root from which true beauty grows. These foreign interlopers are mere weeds in disguise." Seated beside him was Miss Lydia Finch, the club's demure secretary, a slight woman of about 40, with mousy brown hair pinned back neatly and spectacles that perched on the end of her nose. Miss Finch lived in a modest cottage on the village outskirts, where she tended a small herb garden and earned her keep as a typist for the local solicitor. Her role in the club involved meticulous record-keeping, noting down minutes with a precision that bordered on the obsessive. Yet there was a fragility about her, a tendency to flutter her hands when nervous, and her eyes often darted toward Mr. Potts with a look that spoke of unspoken affections. Mrs. Hargrove, ever observant, had noticed this and occasionally made pointed remarks about unseemly attachments that left Miss Finch blushing to the roots of her hair. Across the table sat Mrs. Clara Wilkins, a robust widow in her late 50s, with cheeks as rosy as the apples in her orchard and a laugh that boomed like thunder. Mrs. Wilkins was Mrs. Hargrove's chief rival in the flower show, her dahlias having taken first prize the previous year in a decision that had sparked no small amount of controversy. Luck of the weather, Mrs. Hargrove had sniffed at the time, but those who knew her better detected the sting of defeat. Mrs. Wilkins gardened on a larger scale, her property boasting greenhouses and a small nursery where she propagated plants for sale. She dressed practically in tweeds and sturdy boots, her hands bearing the calluses of honest toil, and she spoke her mind with a forthrightness that often clashed with Mrs. Hargrove's more refined sensibilities. Completing the inner circle was Dr. Harold Benson, the village physician, a man of 60, with a kindly face framed by wire-rimmed glasses and a neatly trimmed beard, turning gray at the edges. Dr. Benson was not an avid gardener himself. His small plot was given over to medicinal herbs, but he attended the club meetings as a courtesy, often providing advice on pest control or soil health from a scientific perspective. He had been Mrs. Hargrove's doctor for years, treating her for a weak heart that required regular medication, and there was a familiarity between them that suggested a long-standing acquaintance, perhaps even friendship. Yet, lately, observers had noted a certain tension. Whispers in the village shop spoke of heated consultations behind closed doors. And then there was Miss Jane Marple, the elderly spinster who had been invited as a guest of honor. Miss Marple resided in a cozy cottage on the High Street, where she spent her days knitting intricate patterns and observing the world with eyes that missed nothing. Frail in appearance, with white hair coiled in a bun and a shawl draped over her shoulders, she possessed a mind as sharp as a tack and an understanding of human nature honed by decades of quiet vigilance. She was not a regular member of the garden club. Her own garden was modest, featuring mainly roses and a few hardy annuals. But Mrs. Hargrove had extended the invitation personally, perhaps sensing that Miss Marple's presence lent an air of respectability to the proceedings. As she sat in a wicker chair slightly apart from the others, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, she resembled nothing so much as a benevolent grandmother. But those who underestimated her did so at their peril. Miss Marple had unraveled more than one knotty problem in St. Mary Mead, drawing parallels from village life to the greater mysteries of the world. The gathering had begun promptly at 3 o'clock, as was customary. Mrs. Hargrove welcomed her guests with a gracious smile, gesturing toward the laden table. "Do come and sit, everyone. Annie has outdone herself with the preparations today." Annie, the young maid who had been in service at Rosewood for just over a year, bobbed a curtsy and began pouring the tea, her starched apron crisp against her black dress. She was a local girl, 19 years old, with freckles across her nose and a quick, efficient manner that masked a certain resentment toward her employer. Mrs. Hargrove was known to be exacting, demanding perfection in every detail, and Annie had borne the brunt of more than one scolding for a smudged saucer or a lukewarm pot. As the group settled into their seats, conversation flowed like the tea from the silver spout. Mr. Potts launched into a discourse on the merits of his latest orchid acquisition, a rare specimen from the Amazon. "It's called Cattleya maxima, you know. Requires precise humidity. I've installed a new misting system in the greenhouse. Should bloom spectacularly for the show." Mrs. Hargrove nodded indulgently, though her eyes narrowed slightly. "How adventurous of you, Reginald! Though one wonders if such tropical extravagances truly belong in an English garden. Our native blooms have served us well for centuries." Mrs. Wilkins chuckled, her voice carrying across the gazebo. "Oh, come now, Eleanor. Variety is the spice of life. My dahlias wouldn't be half so grand without a bit of crossbreeding. Remember last year's Bishop of Llandaff, a hybrid through and through." Miss Finch, stirring her tea carefully, ventured a timid opinion. "I do think the traditional roses are safest. They never disappoint." Her gaze flicked to Mr. Potts, who smiled encouragingly, causing her to blush. Dr. Benson cleared his throat, interjecting with his usual measured tone. "From a medical standpoint, I must say that some of these exotic plants can be quite hazardous. Take the foxglove, for instance. Beautiful, but its digitalis can stop a heart if mishandled." Mrs. Hargrove laughed lightly, though there was an edge to it. "Harold, always the voice of caution, but we're gardeners, not apothecaries, though I suppose one must be wary of poisons in the plot. Rats have been a nuisance this year. I've had to resort to arsenic in the shed." Miss Marple, who had been quietly observing, set down her knitting for a moment. "Poisons, indeed. They remind me of old Mrs. Bantry's gardener back in the day. He swore by strychnine for the moles, but it led to quite a to-do when the vicar's cat went missing." Her voice was soft, almost musing, but the others paused, as if sensing the weight behind her words. The conversation shifted to the upcoming flower show, with discussions of judging criteria and potential entries. Mr. Potts boasted of his orchids' chances, while Mrs. Wilkins defended her dahlias with vigor. Miss Finch noted down ideas for the program, her pencil scratching busily. Dr. Benson offered tips on preventing blight, and Mrs. Hargrove steered the talk with subtle authority, ensuring no one dominated unduly. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn, Mrs. Hargrove rose to propose the toast. "My dear friends," she announced, lifting her delicate teacup with a flourish, "let us toast to another splendid flower show. May our gardens flourish, our blooms dazzle, and our rivalries remain friendly." The group murmured agreement, clinking cups with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Miss Marple noted the forced smiles. "Mr." Potts fidgeted with his napkin, his eyes avoiding Mrs. Hargrove's. Mrs. Wilkins glared momentarily at the prize roses displayed nearby, as if measuring them against her own. Miss Finch's gaze darted nervously to Mr. Potts, her hand trembling slightly on her cup. Mrs. Hargrove took a sip from her tea, savoring the moment. But then, quite suddenly, her expression changed. She set the cup down with a clatter, her free hand clutching at her throat. Her face contorted in agony, color draining from her cheeks to leave them ashen. "Poison," she gasped, her voice a ragged whisper that cut through the chatter like a knife. "In my cup. Poison!" Chaos erupted. Mrs. Hargrove slumped forward, her body convulsing briefly before going still, her eyes wide and staring. Screams pierced the air. Miss Finch's high-pitched wail, Mrs. Wilkins' shocked exclamation. Mr. Potts leaped to his feet, knocking over his chair. "While, Doctor." Benson rushed forward, his medical instincts taken over. He knelt beside her, fingers pressing to her neck in search of a pulse. "Eleanor!" "Good God, someone fetch water. No, better yet, the constable." Annie, who had been clearing plates nearby, dropped her tray with a crash, porcelain shattering on the gravel. "Ma'am!" "Oh, ma'am!" she cried, her face pale with fright. Miss Marple remained seated, her knitting paused mid-stitch, but her eyes were alert, taking in every detail, the overturned cup spilling its contents onto the linen, the faint steam still rising from the teapot, the positions of each guest. "Dear me," she murmured to herself, "how very unfortunate, and yet not entirely unexpected in a way." The village constable, a sturdy man named Slack, who lived just down the lane, arrived within minutes, summoned by a breathless Annie. He surveyed the scene with a furrowed brow, his notebook at the ready. "What's all this, then? Mrs. Hargrove, is she?" Dr. Benson straightened, his face grim. "I'm afraid so. Pulse is gone. Symptoms suggest poison, as she said. We'll need the inspector. This looks like foul play." Whispers of murder rippled through the air, mingling with the scent of flowers now seeming cloyingly sweet. The guests were herded into the drawing-room, while Constable Slack secured the garden. Mr. Potts paced nervously, muttering about shocking business. Mrs. Wilkins fanned herself with a napkin, declaring, "Who could have done such a thing? We were all right here." Miss Finch wept quietly into her handkerchief, consoled by Dr. Benson's gentle words. Miss Marple, accepting a shawl from Annie, reflected on the tableau. It reminded her of a case long ago in St. Mary Mead, involving a tainted batch of scones at the Women's Institute. People are much the same everywhere, she thought. Ambition, jealousy, secrets, they bloom like weeds if not checked. As the afternoon light faded, the manor took on a somber air. Inspector Craddock would arrive soon from the county police, but for now the group sat in uneasy silence, each lost in their thoughts. Who among them had slipped the fatal dose into the teacup, and why? The answers lay hidden, like roots beneath the soil, waiting to be unearthed. But let us delve deeper into the events leading up to this tragic afternoon, for mysteries such as these do not spring forth unbidden. They are nurtured by the soil of past grievances, watered by unspoken resentments, and brought to bloom by opportunity. Earlier that morning, Rosewood Manor had been a hive of activity. Mrs. Hargrove, rising at her customary hour of 7, had inspected the gardens with a critical eye. The roses were her particular favorites, velvety petals in crimson and gold, their thorns a reminder that beauty often came with a price. She paused by the border where Mr. Potts had once suggested planting his orchids, her lips pursing in disapproval. "No," she murmured to herself, "this is my domain." In the kitchen, Annie prepared the tea tray under Mrs. Hargrove's watchful gaze. "Mind the cups, girl, not a fingerprint on them," the mistress instructed. Annie nodded, her thoughts elsewhere. Her mother had worked at Rosewood years ago, dismissed for some trifling offense, and the family had struggled ever since. One day, Annie thought bitterly, things will change. Mr. Potts arrived first, his car crunching on the gravel drive. He carried a small pot of his prized orchid, intending to show it off. "Eleanor, my dear," he greeted, "I've brought a sample. Perhaps you'll reconsider for the show." Mrs. Hargrove's smile was thin. "We'll see, Reginald. But remember, the judges value purity over novelty." Miss Finch came next, her bicycle propped against the gate. She clutched a notebook, her face flushed from the ride. "Good morning, Mrs. Hargrove. I've the minutes from last meeting ready for approval." "Excellent, Lydia. Do come in. We must discuss the agenda." Mrs. Wilkins bustled up the path shortly after, a basket of fresh-cut dahlias on her arm. "Thought I'd bring these for the table. Show what real English breeding can do." Dr. Benson arrived last, his doctor's bag in hand. "Just a quick check on your heart, Eleanor, as promised." In the privacy of the study, he listened to her chest with his stethoscope. "Still irregular. You must avoid stress." She waved him off. "Nonsense, Harold. The club is my life." As the guests assembled in the garden, subtle tensions emerged. Mr. Potts and Miss Finch exchanged glances when Mrs. Hargrove's back was turned, their hands brushing accidentally as they reached for sandwiches. Mrs. Wilkins commented loudly on the over-pruned roses, eliciting a sharp retort from the hostess. Dr. Benson watched it all with a detached air, but his fingers drummed on the table. Miss Marple, arriving by taxi, was escorted to her seat. "Such a lovely day," she remarked. "Reminds me of the fate where poor Colonel Prothero met his end." The toast came, the sip, the gasp, and the world of saint. Mary Mead was forever altered. Yet to fully appreciate the web being spun, one must consider the histories interwoven here. Mrs. Hargrove's marriage to the late Mr. Hargrove had been one of convenience, not love, and rumors persisted of his infidelities. Mr. Potts's banking career had ended amid whispers of irregularities, though nothing proven. Miss Finch's family scandal, her father's bankruptcy, hung over her like a cloud. Mrs. Wilkins' rivalry dated back to school days, when Eleanor had stolen her beau. Dr. Benson's practice had seen better days, with patients drifting to the new doctor in town. And Annie, her locket, hidden beneath her uniform, held a secret connection to the Hargrove family, one that could upend everything if revealed. As the constable took statements, Miss Marple knitted on, her mind piecing together the pattern. The poison in the teacup was but the flower. The roots ran deep. The sun set on Rosewood Manor, casting the gardens in twilight hues. The flower show would go on, but without its queen, or so it seemed. Chapter 2. The Arrival of Suspicion. The drawing-room of Rosewood Manor, with its heavy velvet drapes and polished mahogany furniture, seemed to absorb the weight of the tragedy that had unfolded in the garden. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting long, wavering shadows across the Persian rug, as if the room itself were reluctant to reveal its secrets. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax polish and the faint, lingering perfume of Mrs. Hargrove's lavender sachets, but these comforts did little to ease the tension that gripped the assembled members of the St. Mary Mead Garden Club. They sat in a semicircle on overstuffed armchairs and a brocade sofa, their faces etched with varying degrees of shock, fear, and calculation. The clink of teacups had been replaced by the scratch of Constable Slack's pencil as he scribbled notes, and the distant hum of bees in the garden was drowned out by the murmur of uneasy voices. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, appeared almost serene, her knitting needles moving with a steady rhythm that belied the sharpness of her gaze. Her shawl, a soft gray wool, draped loosely over her shoulders, and her eyes darted from one guest to another, noting the small gestures that spoke louder than words. Mr. Reginald Potts's restless fingers twisting his cufflinks, Miss Lydia Finch's hands clutching a damp handkerchief, Mrs. Clara Wilkins' defiant tilt of her chin, and Dr. Harold Benson studied calm as he adjusted his glasses. Annie, the maid, hovered near the door, her apron still smudged from the spilled tray, her eyes wide with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Constable Slack, a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, stood by the mantelpiece, his notebook open and his brow furrowed. He was competent enough for petty thefts and village disputes, but a suspected murder was beyond his usual purview, and he was acutely aware of the need for Inspector Craddock, who had been summoned from the county police station in Much Benham. Until the inspector arrived, Slack was determined to maintain order and gather what information he could. "Now, let's have it straight," Slack began, his voice gruff. "Mrs. Hargrove collapsed after drinking her tea, claiming it was poisoned. Dr. Benson, you confirmed she's dead?" Dr. Benson nodded solemnly, his hands clasped in front of him. "Yes, Constable. No pulse, no respiration. The symptoms, convulsions, pallor, rapid onset, suggest a potent toxin, possibly ingested through the tea. I couldn't do more without a proper examination, but I've sent for the coroner." Slack scribbled this down, his pencil moving with deliberate care. "Right. And who prepared the tea? The tray, the cups, all of it?" Mr. Potts cleared his throat, his mustache quivering slightly. "The maid, Annie, brought the tray out to the gazebo, but we all helped ourselves to the tea. Mrs. Hargrove poured her own cup, as I recall Annie, standing stiffly by the door, flushed at the mention of her name. "I only set out the tray, sir," she said, her voice trembling. The teapot was filled in the kitchen, and the cups were clean. I swear it. Mrs. Hargrove checked them herself this morning. Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, her eyes resting on Annie. "How diligent of her," she murmured, almost to herself. "Mrs. Hargrove was always particular about her china, wasn't she? Reminds me of Mrs. Price Ridley, who wouldn't let a speck of dust near her Wedgwood Mrs. Wilkins, perched on the edge of the sofa, snorted softly. Eleanor was obsessive about everything. Those forget-me-not cups were her pride and joy. She'd have noticed a smudge from a mile off Constable Slack, turned to Miss Finch, who was twisting her handkerchief into knots. "Miss Finch, you were sitting closest to Mrs. Hargrove. Did you see anyone tamper with her cup?" Miss Finch's spectacles slipped down her nose, and she pushed them back with a trembling finger. No, Constable. I was taking notes for the meeting. I didn't notice anything unusual. We were all chatting, about the flower show." "Chatting," Slack repeated, his tone skeptical. He turned to Mr. Potts. "I hear you and Mrs. Hargrove had a bit of a row recently, Mr. Potts. Something about the flower show entries?" Potts' face reddened, and he tugged at his collar. "A disagreement? Nothing more?" "She accused me of sabotaging her orchids by introducing a pest into her greenhouse." "Utter nonsense. My own orchids are thriving, and I'd never stoop to such tactics." Mrs. Wilkins leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Oh, come now, Reginald. Eleanor called my dahlias common last week, said they didn't belong in a proper show. She had a way of ruffling feathers, didn't she? I wouldn't be surprised if someone took offense." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression mild, but her mind alert. "Indeed, Mrs. Wilkins, one must consider motives in such cases. Mrs. Hargrove was a woman of strong opinions and stronger enemies. In my experience, village quarrels can brew like bitter tea, especially where pride and prestige are concerned." Dr. Benson adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but firm. "Let's not jump to conclusions. I prescribed Eleanor heart medication, digitalis to be precise. It's possible she took too much by mistake, or it interacted with something else. An overdose could mimic poisoning. Slack's eyes narrowed. "Digitalis, you say? That's from foxgloves, isn't it? Plenty of those in her garden." "Yes," Benson admitted, "but it's a controlled substance. I'd know if her dosage was off. Still, I'd need to check her medical records to be certain." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soft counterpoint to the rising tension. "Doctors know their patients well, don't they?" she remarked. "And gardeners know their plants. It's curious how knowledge can be a double-edged sword." Constable Slack scribbled furiously, then looked up. "Anyone else see anything odd? Speak now, or it'll be harder to explain later." Miss Finch hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Hargrove, she was unkind to many of us. She could be so sharp, but surely no one here would—" Her words trailed off, and she buried her face in her handkerchief. Mrs. Wilkins crossed her arms. "Unkind is putting it mildly. She practically accused me of cheating at last year's show. Said my dahlias were artificially enhanced." "As if I'd stoop to that," Potts muttered. "She was high-handed, no question." "But murder? That's a leap." Dr. Benson shook his head. "We're all respectable people here, Constable. This must be an accident or a misunderstanding." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes twinkling with that peculiar insight that had unnerved many a wrongdoer in St. Mary Mead. Respectability, Doctor. Benson is such a fragile veneer. Like a rose petal, it looks sturdy until you touch it. I recall a case in the village, years ago, where a most respectable gentleman poisoned his wife's tea over a matter of inheritance. Appearances, you see, are not always what they seem. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like dust. Constable Slack, sensing the need for authority, clapped his notebook shut. Right. No one leaves the manor until Inspector Craddock arrives. Annie, show me the kitchen where the tea was prepared. The rest of you, stay put. As Slack and Annie departed, the group exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Potts paced to the window, staring out at the darkening garden. Mrs. Wilkins muttered about the shocking state of affairs. Miss Finch dabbed at her eyes, while Dr. Benson sat rigidly, his hands folded in his lap. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her thoughts turning like the pages of a well-read book. The teacup, the poison, the sudden collapse. It was all too neat, too theatrical. She recalled a similar incident at the vicarage, where a seemingly accidental death had unraveled into a web of deceit. Human nature, she mused, is so predictable. Someone here knows more than they're saying. Outside, the garden lay quiet under the gathering dusk, the roses and dahlias standing sentinel over secrets yet to be unearthed. The arrival of Inspector Craddock would bring new scrutiny, but for now, suspicion hung over Rosewood Manor like a storm cloud, ready to break. Chapter 3. The Nephew's Shadow. The morning following the tragic events at Rosewood Manor dawned with a deceptive brightness, the sun rising over St. Mary Mead in a blaze of gold that gilded the rooftops and sparkled on the dew-kissed leaves. Yet, beneath this cheerful facade, the village hummed with the low buzz of speculation as neighbors gathered at the post office and the tea shop to exchange whispers about the poison in Mrs. Hargrove's teacup. Word had spread like wildfire through the hedgerows. Murder in the garden club, a genteel gathering turned deadly. The local newspaper, the Much Benham Gazette, had already dispatched a reporter, and villagers eyed one another with newfound wariness, wondering who among their familiar faces might harbor a killer's heart. Rosewood Manor itself stood silent and somber, its ivy-covered walls seeming to sag under the weight of grief. The gardens, so vibrant the day before, now appeared forlorn, the flowers drooping as if in mourning for their mistress. Police tape fluttered from the gazebo like macabre ribbons, and Constable Slack patrolled the grounds with a purposeful stride, his uniform a stark contrast to the pastoral setting. Inside, the drawing-room had been transformed into a makeshift headquarters, with Inspector Craddock at its center, methodically sifting through statements and evidence. Inspector Craddock was a solid, unassuming man in his 40s, with a square jaw and keen gray eyes that missed little. He had arrived late the previous evening, his car crunching on the gravel drive under the stars, and had immediately taken charge with quiet efficiency. Unlike the blustering Slack, Craddock possessed a thoughtful demeanor, honed by years of unraveling the tangled skeins of human deceit in the county. He had interviewed the guests briefly before allowing them to disperse to their homes under strict instructions not to leave the village. And now, as the clock struck 9, he prepared for a deeper probe. Miss Jane Marple, having spent a restless night in her cottage on the High Street, though she would never admit to such a thing, decided to pay a visit to Rosewood. She arrived on foot, her sensible shoes clicking on the path a basket of wool over her arm, as if she were merely calling on a neighbor for tea. But her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, took in every detail: the footprints in the soft earth near the garden shed, the wilted roses that had been Mrs. Hargrove's pride, and the faint scent of arsenic that lingered in the air, or so her imagination suggested. Annie, the maid, answered the door with red-rimmed eyes, her cap askew and her apron wrinkled from a sleepless night. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice quavering, "it's dreadful, isn't it? The inspector's in the drawing-room, questioning everyone again. And now Master Timothy's arrived from London. Looks like he's seen a ghost." Miss Marple patted the girl's arm gently. There, my dear. These things are always a shock. Might I come in? I thought perhaps I could offer some comfort, or at least a listening ear." Annie nodded and led her inside, where the air was heavy with the smell of furniture polish and stale tea. In the hallway, Miss Marple paused, her ears catching a snippet of conversation from the adjacent study. It was Miss Lydia Finch's voice, low and urgent, speaking to someone unseen. "I saw Master Timothy in the garden shed last week, handling rat poison. He was furtive about it, too." "Shh," came the hissed reply. "Miss Finch's," Miss Marple realized. "Don't spread rumors, Annie. The police will handle it." Miss Marple filed this away, her expression unchanging as she entered the drawing-room. Inspector Craddock looked up from his notes, his face lighting with recognition. "Miss Marple, I didn't expect to see you so soon. Come to offer your insights, have you?" She smiled modestly, settling into a chair with her knitting. "Oh, nothing so grand, Inspector. Just an old woman's curiosity. But do tell me, have there been developments?" Craddock leaned back, rubbing his chin. "The coroner's preliminary report confirms poison, arsenic, likely administered in the tea. No fingerprints on the cup beyond Mrs. Hargrove's own, but that's not surprising in a social setting. Motives are plentiful. Rivalries in the garden club, old grudges, and now the nephew's turned up." As if on cue, the door opened, and Timothy Hargrove entered, escorted by Constable Slack. Timothy was a young man of about 30, tall and slim with the polished air of a city dweller. His suit was impeccably tailored, though rumpled from travel, and his face was pale, his eyes shadowed with what could be grief or guilt. He carried a leather briefcase, and his hands trembled slightly as he set it down. "Mr. Hargrove," Craddock said, gesturing to a seat, "thank you for coming so promptly. My condolences on your aunt's death." Timothy nodded, sinking into the chair. "It's a shock, Inspector. I received the telegram last night and caught the first train from London. Aunt Eleanor, she was like a mother to me after my parents passed." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her gaze appraising. Young men like Timothy reminded her of her nephew Raymond, ambitious, charming, but with a streak of recklessness that could lead to trouble. "How kind of you to come," she said gently. "Family ties are so important in times like these." Craddock cleared his throat. "Indeed. Now, Mr. Hargrove, I understand you stand to inherit Rosewood Manor and your aunt's estate. Is that correct?" Timothy flushed, his eyes darting to the window. "Yes, that's right. Uncle, my father's brother, was cut off years ago for some family quarrel. But I loved Aunt Eleanor. We corresponded regularly. I visited just last month." "And during that visit," Craddock pressed, consulting his notes, "did you have access to the garden shed?" We found a half-empty bottle of arsenic there, rat poison, but the same type detected in your aunt's system. Timothy's pallor deepened. The shed? Yes, I suppose I did. Aunt Eleanor mentioned rats infesting the potting area. I offered to handle it, set some traps, that sort of thing. But poison? I might have moved a bottle, but I didn't use it on her, if that's what you're implying. Miss Marple interjected softly. Young men are often helpful in such matters. My nephew Raymond once dealt with a mold problem in my garden, quite vigorously, too. But one must be careful with poisons. They have a way of turning up in unexpected places. Craddock stood, motioning to Slack. Let's have a look at that shed, shall we? Mr. Hargrove, if you'd accompany us. The group proceeded outside, the morning air crisp and laden with the scent of earth and blooms. The garden shed was a weathered structure at the far end of the property, its door creaking open to reveal shelves lined with tools, pots, and bottles of various concoctions. Craddock donned gloves and lifted a dusty bottle labeled arsenic for vermin control, half its contents gone. This matches the poison in the teacup, he declared, holding it up to the light. And the dust is disturbed, recently handled. Timothy protested vehemently, his voice rising. It's for the rats. The garden's infested. Look, there's droppings everywhere. I was just helping out. Anyone could have taken it. Miss Marple, peering inside, noted the footprints in the dirt floor. Several sets, including smaller ones that might belong to Annie or Miss Finch. How convenient, she murmured. Poisons in a garden are like secrets in a village. Everyone knows where they are, but no one admits to using them. Back in the drawing-room, Timothy paced, his composure cracking. Inspector, I had no reason to kill her. The inheritance? Yes, I need it. Business in London hasn't been booming. But murder? Never. Craddock eyed him steadily. We'll check your alibi for yesterday. You say you were in London? Yes, at my office until late. Colleagues can vouch for me. As Timothy was dismissed for the moment, Miss Marple confided in Craddock over a cup of tea provided by a subdued Annie. Young men like Timothy remind me of my nephew Raymond, ambitious, but not always wise. They see opportunities where others see obstacles. But is guilt written on his face, or merely surprise? Craddock sighed. The evidence is circumstantial, but damning. The poison, the motive, the opportunity during his last visit. Still, I sense there's more to this. Indeed, as the day progressed, layers of suspicion peeled back like onion skins. Miss Marple, lingering at the manor under the pretense of consoling the staff, overheard more whispers. In the kitchen, Annie confided in the cook, a stout woman named Mrs. Potts, no relation to Reginald, who was kneading dough with vigorous slaps. I tell you, Mrs. Potts, Master Timothy was sneaking about that shed, and he argued with the mistress last visit, something about money. I heard raised voices. Mrs. Potts clucked her tongue. Hush, girl. The walls have ears. But Mrs. Hargrove was tight with her purse. Wouldn't lend him a penny, she said. Miss Marple, entering on the excuse of fetching water, smiled benignly. Such a trying time for everyone. Servants see so much, don't they? Like my old maid Cherry, who knew all the village secrets. Annie flushed, busying herself with pots. We don't gossip, miss. Outside, Mr. Reginald Potts arrived for further questioning, his face flushed. Inspector, this nephew business, Timothy's always been a slippery one. Eleanor told me he was pressuring her for loans. Craddock noted this down. "And you? Your disagreement with her over the orchids?" "A trifle. But if you're looking for suspects, don't overlook Clara Wilkins. Her dahlias were threatened by Eleanor's roses this year. She'd do anything to win." Mrs. Wilkins, summoned next, bristled at the accusation when relayed. "Me? Poison. I'd sooner pull weeds by hand. But that Timothy, city slicker, always sniffing around the estate." Miss Lydia Finch, arriving pale and tremulous, added her own tidbit. I saw Timothy near the tea tray yesterday just before the toast. He could have slipped something in." Timothy, confronted with this, denied it hotly. "Lies! I wasn't even there yet. No, wait, I arrived this morning." Finch faltered. "Last visit, I mean. He was always lurking. Dr. Benson, dropping by to check on the household, offered a medical perspective. Arsenic takes time to act sometimes. If dosed earlier, it could explain the sudden collapse. Timothy's last visit was a week ago. Plenty of time to tamper with her medication." Miss Marple, knitting in the corner, pondered. How intricate. Like planting bulbs in autumn for spring bloom. The poison could have been set long ago. As afternoon waned, Craddock searched Timothy's briefcase, finding letters from creditors demanding payment. "Debts, Mr. Hargrove? Motive enough for some." Timothy slumped. "Yes, I'm in a bind. But I wouldn't kill for it." Village gossip amplified the shadow over Timothy. At the tea shop, old Mrs. Price Ridley declared, "Mark my words, it's the nephew. Blood's thicker than water, but greed's thicker still." Miss Marple, returning home, reflected on the day's revelations. Timothy's arrival had stirred the pot, but was he the poisoner or a convenient scapegoat? Human nature, she knew, delighted in misdirection, like a gardener training vines to hide an ugly wall. The sun set on St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows that seemed to point accusingly at Rosewood Manor. The nephew's shadow loomed largest, but in the web of secrets others lurked. To deepen the intrigue, consider the undercurrents rippling through the village. Timothy Hargrove had not always been the polished Londoner he appeared. Born to a branch of the family fallen on hard times, he had clawed his way up through sheer determination, attending a second-rate university on scholarships, and landing a position in a middling firm dealing in imports. His letters to Aunt Eleanor, discovered in her desk by Craddock, revealed pleas for financial aid couched in affectionate terms, but with an undercurrent of desperation. "Dearest Aunt," one read, "your guidance has always been my beacon. If only I could secure this loan, my future would be assured." Eleanor's replies, crisp and unyielding, showed her reluctance. "Timothy, self-reliance is the greatest virtue. I cannot bail you out eternally." Such exchanges painted a picture of strained relations, yet Timothy's alibi held, for now. His London colleagues confirmed his presence at a meeting until evening, though a clever man could have arranged a proxy or slipped away. Meanwhile, Annie's whisperings gained traction. The maid, with her freckled face and quick eyes, harbored her own grievances. Her mother, dismissed from Rosewood years ago for alleged theft, a charge never proven, had instilled in Annie a quiet resentment. "Watch that family," her mother had said. "They chew you up and spit you out." Was Annie's sighting of Timothy in the shed accurate or embellished to deflect suspicion? Miss Marple, ever observant, noted the girl's nervous habits, biting her nails, avoiding eye contact. Mr. Potts, too, had his shadows. His embezzlement of club funds, hinted at in later chapters but simmering now, made him eager to point fingers elsewhere. "That boy Timothy," he confided to Doctor. Benson over brandy that evening always had a shifty look. Benson, nursing his own secrets, an old affair with Eleanor perhaps, nodded sagely. Youth and ambition make a volatile mix. Miss Finch, lovesick for pots, echoed the sentiments in her diary, entries that Craddock would later peruse. "Timothy frightens me. His eyes are cold, like winter frost on roses." Mrs. Wilkins, robust and forthright, spread her own tales at the village pub. "Saw him arguing with Eleanor last month, over money, no doubt. Mark my words, he's the one." As night fell, Timothy sat alone in his aunt's study, staring at the portrait of Eleanor above the fireplace, stern, unyielding. A knock came. Inspector Craddock, with more questions. "Mr. Hargrove, we found arsenic traces in your aunt's medicine cabinet. Care to explain?" Timothy paled. I don't know. Perhaps she used it herself. For the rats." Craddock's eyes hardened. "Or someone close to her did." The shadow lengthened, enveloping the manor in doubt. But Miss Marple, in her cottage, knitted on, unraveling the threads one by one. The nephew was suspect, yes, but in Saint. Mary Mead, shadows often hid deeper darkness. Expanding further, the investigation revealed Timothy's train ticket from London, time-stamped that morning, but a villager claimed to have seen a man resembling him near the manor the previous evening. A red herring, perhaps, or a case of mistaken identity. The arsenic bottle bore no fingerprints, wiped clean, suggesting premeditation. Miss Marple visited the shed again, alone, her flashlight piercing the gloom. Amid the tools, she found a scrap of paper, a London receipt dated the week before for rat poison. "Timothy's?" "Curious," she murmured, "like the case of young Freddie in the village, who bought sweets, but claimed they were for his sister." Craddock, informed, confronted Timothy. "This receipt, yours?" Timothy stammered. "Yes, but for my own flat. Rats there, too. Plausible, but suspicion mounted. The web tightened, but the spider remained hidden." Chapter 4. The Doctor's Dilemma. The Village of Saint. Mary Mead, typically a haven of bucolic calm, had transformed into a cauldron of conjecture by the second day after Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's untimely demise. The sun climbed high in a cloudless sky, bathing the thatched roofs and winding lanes in a warm glow that did little to dispel the chill of suspicion settling over the community. At the heart of this unrest stood Doctor. Harold Benson Surgery, a modest red-brick building on the high street, sandwiched between the post office and the baker's shop. Its brass plaque, polished to a shine, proclaimed H. Benson, M.D., in elegant script. But today the door swung open more frequently than usual, not for ailments of the body, but for those of the curious mind. Villagers, under the guise of minor complaints, a headache here, a sprained ankle there, flocked to the waiting room, their ears attuned to any scrap of gossip about the poison that had felled the garden club's president. Dr. Benson himself moved through his consultations with the practiced efficiency of a man long accustomed to the rhythms of rural life. At 60, he retained a vigorous air, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on a nose that spoke of scholarly pursuits, and his beard neatly trimmed to conceal the faint lines of weariness etching his face. His hands, steady and capable, had delivered generations of saint. Mary Mead's residents and eased their passages from this world. Yet, on this morning, Those hands trembled ever so slightly as he examined a patient's throat or dispensed a tonic, a tremor that did not escape the notice of the more observant among his callers. Miss Jane Marple, ever the epitome of unobtrusive vigilance, had chosen this day to visit the surgery under the pretext of a touch of rheumatism that plagued her joints in damp weather, though the air was dry as parchment. She arrived mid-morning, her basket hooked over her arm, containing not only her knitting, but a small jar of homemade elderberry jam as a token of neighborly concern. The waiting room was abuzz. Old Mr. Pye, the retired schoolmaster, leafed through a dog-eared magazine while muttering about foul play. Mrs. Price Ridley, the village's self-appointed moral guardian, fanned herself vigorously, her eyes darting like a hawk's, and young Dolly Bantry, newly married, fidgeted with her gloves, her whispers to a companion hinting at overheard arguments. When Miss Marple's turn came, she entered the consulting room with a gentle smile, settling into the leather chair opposite Dr. Benson's desk. The room was lined with bookshelves groaning under medical tomes and jars of specimens, the air scented with antiseptic and the faint aroma of pipe tobacco. A stethoscope lay coiled on the blotter beside a framed photograph of a younger Benson standing beside a woman who bore a striking resemblance to the late Mrs. Hargrove, perhaps a sister or an old friend. "Good morning, Doctor," Miss Marple said, her voice soft and inquiring. "I do hope I'm not imposing. It's just this ache in my knees, nothing serious, I'm sure." Benson adjusted his glasses, his smile professional but strained. "Not at all, Miss Marple. Let's have a look." As he examined her, probing gently, she steered the conversation with the skill of a seasoned angler. "You must be dreadfully shocked about poor Mrs. Hargrove. You were close to her, weren't you? Attending the garden club meetings and all?" He paused, his fingers lingering on her wrist as if checking her pulse. "Yes, quite close. Eleanor consulted me often for her heart condition. A weak valve, nothing life-threatening if managed properly. I warned her about stress, you know. The flower show preparations were taking a toll." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her eyes meeting his. "Stress can be a silent killer, can't it? And with all those quarrels in the club, Mr. Potts and his orchids, Mrs. Wilkins with her dahlias, one wonders if words weren't the only poison at play." Benson's hand tightened imperceptibly on the stethoscope. "Quarrels are common in small villages like ours, but poison, that's a different matter. The inspector seems convinced it's arsenic." "From the garden shed, they say," Miss Marple mused, as if recalling a trivial detail, "though doctors like yourself know all about such substances. Digitalis for the heart, arsenic in old remedies. It must be a burden, carrying that knowledge." He straightened, his expression guarded. "Knowledge is a tool, Miss Marple, not a weapon. I prescribed her digitalis tablets, standard dose. If there's any irregularity, it would show in the post-mortem." As she left with a prescription for liniment, Miss Marple reflected on his demeanor, the slight evasion in his gaze, the tremor in his hands. It reminded her of Dr. Haydock in St. Mary Mead, who once harbored a secret that nearly undid him. Doctors see so much suffering, she thought. Sometimes it twists them. Inspector Craddock, meanwhile, had turned his attention to Benson's records. Arriving at the surgery shortly after noon, he presented a warrant with polite firmness. "Dr. Benson, We'll need to review Mrs. Hargrove's file and perhaps discuss that argument a villager reported hearing the night before the tea party. Benson's office door closed behind them, but echoes of the conversation seeped into the waiting room where ears strained. "Absurd," Benson's voice rose. "I never supplied her tea with anything extra. Check my records. They're impeccable." Craddock's tone remained even. "The witness claims you shouted about secrets that could ruin us both." Care to elaborate? A pause, then Benson's sigh. "It was about her will. Eleanor confided she was changing it, cutting off Timothy entirely. She worried he'd contest it. I advised discretion, that's all. As her doctor and friend, I was concerned for her health." "Friend?" Craddock probed. "Or more. Rumors suggest an old attachment." Benson laughed bitterly. "Village. Tattle. We were close once, years ago, before her marriage. But that's ancient history. Outside, Miss Marple, lingering under the pretense of adjusting her shawl, overheard enough to pique her interest. She made her way to the village shop, where the proprietress, Mrs. Weatherby, leaned over the counter, eager to share. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's dreadful," Dr. Benson arguing with Mrs. Hargrove. "I heard it myself, loud voices from her parlor window, something about betrayal and ruin, and him prescribing all those pills. Who knows what was in them?" Miss Marple purchased a skein of wool, her mind whirring. People do talk. But doctors have ethics, don't they? Though I recall a case where a physician tampered with medication for personal gain. Back at Rosewood Manor, Craddock examined Benson's records, spread across the drawing-room table. The digitalis prescriptions were regular, but a notation caught his eye. Patient reports irregular heartbeat, increased dose advised, but monitor closely. A vial from Hargrove's medicine cabinet matched, but analysis showed traces of arsenic mixed in. Confronted at his surgery later, Benson paled. "Impossible!" I compounded those myself. "Someone must have interfered." Craddock pressed. "Or you did, Doctor." "Motive? Perhaps rejection? Old flames die hard." Benson slumped. "I cared for her, yes, but kill her? Never. Check my alibi. I was at the club meeting the whole time." Miss Marple, visiting Benson that evening under the guise of delivering jam, found him in his study, pipe in hand, staring into the fire. "You look troubled, Doctor." These accusations must weigh heavily. He set down the pipe, his eyes weary. "They do. Eleanor and we shared a past. She ended it for her husband, but feelings lingered. Lately, she confided in me about threats, anonymous notes warning her to step down from the club presidency." "Notes?" Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "Like the ones appearing now, accusing others?" "Similar. She thought it was Wilkins or Potts. I urged her to go to the police, but she laughed it off." Miss Marple nodded. "Pride can be fatal. Reminds me of Colonel Prothero, who ignored warnings and paid the price." As she left, Benson's tremor was more pronounced. Was it guilt or fear? The dilemma deepened as villagers recalled Benson's visits to Rosewood, frequent, sometimes late. Timothy, questioned again, mentioned, "Uncle Harold was always there. Aunt said he fussed too much." Miss Finch, tearful, confided to Craddock, "Doctor." Benson argued with her about money. She lent him funds for his surgery expansion, but demanded repayment. Financial records confirmed a loan, unpaid. Motive? Mrs. Wilkins added fuel. "I saw him in the garden the day before, near the shed. Picking foxgloves, said for study, but who knows? Foxgloves yielded digitalis. Could overdose simulate arsenic? Craddock searched Benson's greenhouse, finding poisonous plants labeled for research. Explain this, doctor. Botanical. Interest. I'm writing a paper on medicinal herbs. Miss Marple, piecing it, thought of parallels. Doctors heal, but knowledge of harm is their shadow. As dusk fell, Benson sat alone, the weight of scrutiny pressing. A knock. Craddock, with more questions. The doctor's dilemma. Prove innocence or unravel under suspicion. To fully grasp the intricacies, one must delve into Benson's history. Born in a nearby town, he had studied medicine in London, returning to St. Mary Mead after a scandalous affair that nearly cost his license, a patient romance, hushed up. Eleanor Hargrove, then Eleanor Thorne, had been involved, choosing marriage to the wealthy solicitor over him. Years later, widowed, she rekindled friendship, but rejected romance. Too late, Harold, she'd said. His practice struggled. The loan from her was a lifeline, but with strings. Her influence over club matters, perhaps? Anonymous notes found in her desk warned, step down or face exposure. Exposure of what? Their past? Benson's hands shook because of early Parkinson's or nerves. Annie recalled, Doctor. Benson brought her medicine the morning of the tea, handed it to her personally. Tampering opportunity. Potts whispered, Benson envied her life. Always said she should have chosen him. Finch. He looked at her with such longing. Wilkins. Jealous of her success. His garden's nothing compared. Timothy. He warned me off the inheritance, said it was cursed. Craddock's net tightened. A search of Benson's home revealed a bottle of arsenic for veterinary use, he claimed. Coincidence? Craddock asked. Necessity for treating livestock. But doubt lingered. Miss Marple, knitting by her window, saw patterns emerge. The doctor heals, but who heals the healer? The chapter closes with Benson under watch, his dilemma a pivot in the unfolding mystery. Chapter 5. The Rival's Revenge. The third day after the poisoning at Rosewood Manor brought with it a subtle shift in the atmosphere of St. Mary Mead, as if the village itself were holding its breath, waiting for the next petal to fall in this unfolding drama of deceit and death. The sky hung low with gray clouds, threatening rain that never quite arrived, mirroring the oppressive tension that had settled over the inhabitants. Whispers in the lanes and shops had evolved from shocked exclamations to pointed speculations, with fingers subtly gesturing toward one suspect or another. The flower show, once the highlight of the season, now loomed like a specter, its preparations halted amid the scandal, leaving gardens untended and blooms wilting under neglect. At the center of this brewing storm stood the home of Mrs. Clara Wilkins, a sprawling cottage on the outskirts of the village, known locally as Dahlia House, for the profusion of those vibrant flowers that dominated its grounds. The property was a gardener's paradise, or nightmare, depending on one's perspective, with greenhouses extending like glassy appendages from the main building, housing an array of exotic plants that Mrs. Wilkins had collected over years of passionate cultivation. Her rivalry with the late Mrs. Hargrove was legendary in St. Mary Mead, a feud rooted in childhood slights and nurtured through decades of competing entries at county fairs and club exhibitions. Where Eleanor Hargrove favored the elegant restraint of English roses, Clara Wilkins embraced the bold exuberance of dahlias, her blooms often taking prizes for their size and color, much to her rival's chagrin. Mrs. Wilkins herself was a force of nature, a widow of 58, with a robust figure honed by hours of digging and pruning, her cheeks perpetually flushed from outdoor labors. She dressed in practical tweeds and sturdy boots, her hands calloused and earth-stained, and her laugh boomed like distant thunder, though lately it had taken on a strained quality. Widowed young after her husband's untimely death in a farming accident, officially ruled accidental, though some murmured of negligence with machinery, she had thrown herself into gardening as both livelihood and obsession, propagating plants for sale and entering every show within reach. Her greenhouse was her sanctuary, filled with humid air thick with the scent of loam and blossoms, but also home to more perilous specimens, nightshade, oleander, and foxgloves, their beauty belying their deadly potential. On this overcast afternoon, Mrs. Wilkins had invited a small gathering to her home, ostensibly to discuss the fate of the flower show in light of recent events. The invitees included Mr. Reginald Potts, Miss Lydia Finch, Dr. Harold Benson, and, at her insistence, Miss Jane Marple, whose reputation for quiet wisdom had spread even to the edges of the village. Inspector Craddock had not been formally invited, but arrived unannounced, his presence a reminder that social niceties were secondary to the pursuit of truth. The group assembled in the largest greenhouse, a cavernous space with misted glass walls and long tables laden with potted plants, the air heavy with moisture and the earthy tang of compost. Mrs. Wilkins greeted them with forced joviality, her voice echoing off the panes. "Come in, come in. Mind the puddles. I've been watering the exotics. Dreadful business about Eleanor, isn't it? But life and gardens must go on." She gestured to a rustic table set with tea and biscuits. Though no one seemed eager to partake, memories of the poisoned cup still fresh. Miss Marple, navigating the uneven flagstone floor with care, her knitting bag slung over her arm, admired a cluster of vibrant orchids. "Such splendid specimens, Mrs. Wilkins. You must put in endless hours. It's a wonder you find time for anything else." Wilkins beamed, though her eyes held a wary glint. "Gardening's my passion, Miss Marple. Eleanor always stole the show with her roses, but my dahlias have heart, real English grit. She accused me of using forbidden fertilizers last year, you know. Said they gave an unfair advantage. The nerve! As if her own plots weren't dosed with who knows what." Mr. Potts, inspecting a nearby fern, chuckled nervously. "Eleanor could be opinionated, but your dahlias are unmatched, Clara. Perhaps this year they'll take top honors without contest." Miss Finch, hovering near the door as if ready to flee, adjusted her spectacles. "It's so humid in here. All these plants, some look quite dangerous." Her gaze lingered on a row of foxgloves, their tubular blooms nodding like purple bells. Dr. Benson, ever the scientist, bent to examine them. Digitalis purpurea, fascinating, the source of heart medication but toxic in excess. One must handle with care. Mrs. Wilkins waved a hand dismissively. "All in the name of botany, Doctor. I study them for their properties. Might write a pamphlet one day. Not for murder, if that's what you're implying." Inspector Craddock, who had been quietly observing from the shadows, stepped forward, producing a leather-bound notebook from his coat pocket. It was Mrs. Wilkins's own, discovered during a search of her property earlier that day, warranted by anonymous tips. "This notebook of yours, Mrs. Wilkins, found in your potting shed, sketches of poisonous foxgloves, Notes on extraction methods. Digitalis can mimic heart failure, you've written here. Care to explain? The group froze, the humid air suddenly stifling. Mrs. Wilkins' face reddened, her hands clenching into fists. That's my private journal. Research, Inspector. Purely academic. I've an interest in herbal remedies. Eleanor's heart was weak. Everyone knew it. But I'd never use it against her. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly as she settled onto a bench, her eyes scanning the faces around her. Jealousy in gardens grew like weeds, didn't it? She recalled a similar rivalry in St. Mary Mead, where two ladies vied over prize marrows, leading to sabotage that escalated dangerously. Research is admirable, she said mildly, but in times like these, even innocent notes can seem sinister. Miss Finch, overhearing the exchange, whispered to Mr. Potts, her voice barely audible over the drip of condensation. Clara hated Eleanor enough to do it. Remember how she stormed out of the last meeting after Eleanor criticized her entries? Potts nodded, his mustache twitching. Hated, yes. But murder? Clara's bark is worse than her bite. Tension mounted as Craddock pressed on. Witnesses say you were seen near Rosewood's gazebo before the tea, Mrs. Wilkins, and these anonymous notes, accusing you of tampering with the tea tray. They've been appearing around the village. Wilkins snatched the notebook back, her eyes flashing. Lies. Someone's framing me. Eleanor had enemies aplenty, Potts with his orchids, that nephew sniffing for inheritance. Why pick on me? Benson interjected, his tone measured. The digitalis could explain the symptoms, convulsions mimicking arsenic poisoning, but who'd have access to both? The gathering dissolved into uneasy chatter, with accusations fluttering like moths around a lamp. Miss Marple, observing quietly, noted Wilkins' defensive posture, the way her eyes darted to the foxglove pots. Was it guilt or genuine outrage? As the group dispersed, rain finally pattering on the greenhouse roof, Craddock lingered, his gaze on Wilkins. "Don't leave the village, madam." "We may have more questions." Alone in her sanctuary, Mrs. Wilkins tended her plants with furious energy, snipping deadheads with sharp shears. "Revenge?" she muttered. If anyone sought revenge, it was Eleanor on me, for winning last year. But the seeds of doubt had been sown, sprouting tendrils that entwined the investigation. To unravel the full tapestry of this chapter, one must delve into the roots of Clara Wilkins' life, a narrative woven with triumphs and tragedies that made her the formidable rival she was. Born Clara Thorne, no relation to Eleanor's maiden name, though fate delighted in such coincidences, she had grown up in a modest farmstead on the village fringes, her hands in the soil from childhood. Her marriage to Albert Wilkins, a bluff farmer with ambitions beyond his means, had promised security, but his death in a threshing machine mishap left her widowed at 30, with debts and a small nursery to manage. Whispers at the time suggested Albert's fondness for drink had contributed, but Clara silenced them with sheer determination, expanding her gardens into a thriving business. Her rivalry with Eleanor began in girlhood at the village school where both excelled in nature studies. Eleanor, from a genteel family, won praise for her delicate flower arrangements, while Clara's robust vegetable plots were deemed common. The slight festered, blooming into adult competition at the flower show. Last year's victory, Clara's dahlia, Bishop of Llandaff, taking best in show over Eleanor's roses, had been sweet, but Eleanor's accusations of chemical enhancement soured it, leading to a public spat that divided the club. Forbidden fertilizers. Eleanor had sneered at the awards ceremony. Your blooms are unnaturally large, smacks of cheating. Clara had retorted, Jealousy doesn't become you, Eleanor. My secrets are hard work and good soil, not your silver spoon shortcuts. The feud escalated, with anonymous complaints to the judges, later traced to Eleanor, nearly disqualifying Clara. Revenge. Clara had motive in spades. Inspector Craddock's discovery of the notebook was no accident. An anonymous tip, scrawled on cheap paper and posted through his door, read, Check Wilkins' shed, poisons and plans. The search yielded not only the journal but a vial of digitalis extract, labeled For Study, hidden among fertilizers. Confronted in her kitchen later, Clara blustered, It's for research. I'm experimenting with natural pesticides. Ask any botanist. Craddock's eyes narrowed. And the notes on dosages? Enough to stop a heart. Sounds premeditated. Academic interest. Eleanor consulted me on plants once, said her heart pills were derived from foxgloves. I noted it down. Miss Marple, visiting under the guise of borrowing cuttings, found Clara in her parlor, surrounded by pressed flowers and gardening tomes. Such dedication, Mrs. Wilkins. But rivalries can poison the soul, can't they? Like that case in my village, where a spurned exhibitor tampered with a rival's entry, led to quite a scandal. Clara's hands shook as she poured tea. Eleanor poisoned everything she touched, accused me falsely, tried to ruin my reputation, but I'd fight fair, in the show ring, not with actual poison. Yet her alibi cracked under scrutiny. A neighbor recalled seeing Clara near Rosewood the morning of the tea. Carrying a basket, said she was delivering plants, but looked furtive. Clara admitted it. I dropped off dahlia tubers for the show table. Eleanor wasn't home. I left them with Annie. Annie confirmed, but added, She lingered by the kitchen, near the tea things. Opportunity. Mr. Potts, questioned anew, revealed. Clara threatened Eleanor once, said she'd make her eat her words. Hyperbole, surely. Miss Finch, loyal to Potts, whispered, Clara's greenhouse has arsenic for pests. She could have mixed it with digitalis. Dr. Benson analyzed samples. The poison was arsenic, but with digitalis traces, perhaps to confuse symptoms. Timothy Hargrove, sensing a shift, pointed fingers. Aunt spoke of Clara's jealousy often, said she feared sabotage. Anonymous notes proliferated, one pinned to the village notice board. Wilkins tampered with the tray, revenge for the show. Another slipped under Potts's door. Clara's foxgloves killed her. Craddock traced the paper to Clara's stationery, but she cried frame up. Someone stole it. Miss Marple, piecing clues, visited the greenhouse alone, her flashlight revealing a torn page from the notebook, notes on blending toxins. Curious, she murmured, like weeds choking flowers, revenge strangles reason. As evening fell, rain lashing the panes, Clara sat amid her plants, the weight of accusation pressing. A knock, Craddock, warrant in hand. Mrs. Wilkins, you're coming in for questioning. Her revenge, if any, had backfired spectacularly. Deepening the narrative, Clara's past held shadows. Albert's death, insurance paid handsomely, funding her greenhouses, rumors of foul play, poison in his flask, dismissed but lingering. Her notebook detailed not just foxgloves, but arsenic uses, effective on rats and rivals. A search uncovered letters from Eleanor. Your cheating will be exposed. Step down gracefully. Clara's reply, unsent, You'll regret crossing me. Motive bloomed. Villagers recalled Clara's temper, smashing pots after losses, vowing retribution. Finch overheard Clara mutter at the tea, "One day she'll get what's coming." Potts confided, "Clara borrowed my pest poison last week, said for her shed." Benson, "She asked about digitalis overdoses. Curious timing." Timothy, "Aunt found foxglove leaves in her compost. Thought Clara planted them." Annie, Mrs. Wilkins visited the kitchen often, friends with the old cook. The web tightened, red herrings abounding, a poisoned apple in Clara's orchard, meant for birds or practice. Miss Marple reflected, rivals mirror each other, beauty and thorns intertwined. The chapter crescendos with Clara's arrest? No, Craddock detains for questioning, suspense building. Rain ceased, but the storm raged on in St. Mary Mead. Chapter 6. The Secretary's Sorrow. The fourth day dawned over St. Mary Mead with a gentle mist that clung to the hedgerows and softened the outlines of the cottages, as if nature itself were attempting to veil the ugliness of the crime that had disrupted the village's serene existence. The air carried the faint, damp scent of impending autumn, mingling with the aroma of wood smoke from early fires kindled in hearths to ward off the chill. In the wake of Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's poisoning, the once cozy rhythm of daily life had fractured. Neighbors exchanged furtive glances across garden fences, and the usual bustle at the high street shops was subdued, punctuated by hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when strangers approached. The flower show, now indefinitely postponed, left a void in the community's calendar, a silent testament to the shadow cast by death. At the heart of this subdued morning was the modest cottage of Miss Lydia Finch, perched on the village outskirts like a shy violet in a field of bolder blooms. The dwelling was unassuming, its thatched roof sagging slightly under the weight of years, and its small herb garden meticulously tended, yielding fragrant bundles of lavender, rosemary, and thyme that Miss Finch dried for sachets sold at the church bazaar. Inside, the rooms were neat to the point of austerity, with lace curtains filtering the light and shelves lined with ledgers from her work as a typist for the local solicitor. It was here that Inspector Craddock had summoned Miss Finch for further questioning, preferring the intimacy of her home to the impersonal air of Rosewood Manor, hoping perhaps that familiar surroundings might loosen tongues tightened by fear. Miss Finch herself was a study in fragility, her slight frame enveloped in a woolen cardigan that seemed too large, her mousy brown hair pinned back with trembling hands. At 40, she carried the air of one who had long ago resigned herself to spinsterhood, her spectacles magnifying eyes that often brimmed with unshed tears. Her role as secretary of the garden club had been her one outlet for social engagement, a position she fulfilled with dogged precision, recording minutes in a fine looping script that betrayed a hidden elegance. Yet, beneath this demure exterior lurked a heart capable of deep passions, as events would soon reveal. Inspector Craddock arrived promptly at 10, accompanied by Constable Slack, whose bulky presence seemed to dwarf the cottage's parlor. Miss Marple, invited by Craddock as an unofficial observer, her keen insights having proven invaluable thus far, followed shortly after, her steps measured and her knitting bag a constant companion. The parlor was cozy, with a chintz sofa and armchairs arranged around a low table bearing a tray of weak tea and digestive biscuits, prepared by Miss Finch's own hand despite her evident distress. "Miss Finch," Craddock began, his voice firm but not unkind, as he settled into a chair, notebook at the ready. "We've spoken before, but new information has come to light. It's best we clear it up now." Miss Finch perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap like a schoolgirl awaiting reprimand. "Of course, Inspector. I'll help however I can. Poor Mrs. Hargrove. It's all so dreadful." Craddock nodded, his gray eyes steady. "Indeed. Now, about your relationship with the deceased. You were her secretary for how long?" "5 years, Miss Finch replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I handled the correspondence, the minutes, the arrangements for meetings. She was exacting, but fair." Miss Marple, seated quietly in the corner, her needles clicking a rhythmic accompaniment, interjected gently. "Exacting employers can be trying, my dear. Reminds me of Lady Bantry's housekeeper, who bore up under similar demands with remarkable fortitude." Craddock steered back. "Witnesses say, Mrs. Hargrove was more than exacting with you, harsh even. Arguments were overheard at club meetings. Miss Finch's cheeks flushed, and she adjusted her spectacles. She could be sharp, yes, but it was nothing serious. Club matters, you know, disagreements over agendas." The inspector leaned forward. "Or personal matters. We've learned Mrs. Hargrove knew certain secrets about you. Care to elaborate?" At this, Miss Finch's composure cracked like fine porcelain under pressure. Her hands flew to her face, and she broke down in tears, sobs racking her slender frame. "Oh, Inspector, she knew my secret. I'm in love with Mr. Potts, Reginald. We've been close, discreetly. But Mrs. Hargrove discovered it and threatened to expose me. And worse, she knew about my family's scandal. My father was a bankrupt, you see. He lost everything in a bad investment years ago, and the shame, it ruined us. She said she'd tell the whole village if I didn't support her in club votes." The room fell silent, save for her weeping. Mr. Potts, who had been summoned to corroborate, entered at that moment, his florid face paling at the sight. He rushed to her side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Lydia, my dear, there. Eleanor was cruel, but I wouldn't kill for it. We both endured her barbs." Craddock's brow furrowed. "Mr. Potts, you confirm this affair?" Potts straightened, his mustache bristling. "Affair? It's love, Inspector, pure and true. Lydia and I have been seeing each other quietly for months. Eleanor found out, spied a note perhaps, and used it against us. Threatened to oust Lydia from the club, spread gossip. But murder? Preposterous." Miss Marple's eyes softened with understanding. "Love makes fools of us all, doesn't it? Like poor Dolly Bantry's maid, who pined for the footman and nearly came undone when secrets surfaced. Such vulnerabilities can lead to desperate acts." Constable Slack, rummaging in his pocket, produced a small item wrapped in evidence cloth, a lace handkerchief embroidered with the initials L.F. "Found this near the poison bottle in the Rosewood shed, Miss Finch. Explain this." Miss Finch's tears redoubled, her voice a wail. "That's mine. But I lost it days ago. During the last club visit, I searched everywhere. Someone's framing me. Oh, why would they do such a thing?" Craddock examined the handkerchief closely. No monogram on the poison bottle itself, but this placement is suspicious, and your access to the manor You were there often for secretarial duties." "I was," she admitted, dabbing her eyes, "but I never went near the shed." "Ask Annie. She'd know," Potts interjected hotly. "This is outrageous. Lydia wouldn't harm a fly. Look to others, Clara Wilkins with her grudges, or that doctor with his shaky hands." The questioning continued, peeling back layers of Miss Finch's life like the pages of one of her ledgers. Her father's bankruptcy had occurred 2 decades prior, a collapse triggered by speculative investments in railway shares that soured during an economic downturn. The family, once modestly prosperous, had been reduced to near penury, forcing young Lydia to leave school early and take up typing to support her ailing mother. The shame had lingered, a stain that Miss Finch guarded jealously, fearing it would tarnish her standing in the tight-knit village. Mrs. Hargrove, with her network of informants, gleaned from years as a pillar of society, had unearthed the detail during a routine background check on club members, wielding it like a weapon to ensure loyalty. "She cornered me after a meeting," Miss Finch confessed between sobs. "Said if I didn't vote against Mr. Potts's orchid proposal, she'd whisper it to Mrs. Price Ridley, who spreads news like fertilizer. And about Reginald, she called it unseemly, a secretary mooning over the vice president. Threatened to have me removed." Miss Marple nodded sagely. "Blackmail is a nasty business, my dear. It festers like blight on leaves. I've seen it drive good people to extremes." Craddock probed further. "Did you confront her? Any threats on your part?" "Never," Miss Finch protested. "I begged her to keep silent. She laughed, said secrets kept the club in order." Red herrings emerged as the interview deepened. A villager reported seeing Miss Finch near the Rosewood shed a week prior, fumbling with something white, perhaps the handkerchief. But Miss Finch insisted it was her shopping list, blown away by wind. Another whisper, a forged letter in Hargrove's desk accusing Benson of malpractice in handwriting mimicking Finch's script. "Someone's imitating me," she cried. Potts added, "Lydia lent me her handkerchief once for a cut finger during potting. Anyone could have taken it." Dr. Benson, summoned for cross-reference, arrived mid-afternoon, his beard neatly combed, but his eyes weary. "Miss Finch? She's been to my surgery for nerves, prescribed mild sedatives, but poison. She's too timid. Yet a search of Finch's cottage yielded a bottle of sedative pills, chemically similar to digitalis in structure. Could be mixed with arsenic," Craddock mused. "I'd take them as prescribed," Finch wailed. Mrs. Wilkins, dropping by uninvited with a basket of herbs for calming teas, overheard and smirked. "Timid? Lydia's got spine when cornered. Eleanor pushed her too far." Timothy Hargrove, interviewed separately, recalled, "Aunt mentioned Finch's pathetic infatuation, said she'd handle it." Annie, the maid, confided to Slack. Miss Finch visited the kitchen often, chatted about recipes. Could have slipped near the tea. Miss Marple, sipping tea, observed the sorrow etching Finch's features. Grief and fear look much alike. But true sorrow has a depth, like roots in soil. As evening approached, Craddock wrapped up, cautioning Finch not to leave. "We'll verify the handkerchief. Fibers, perhaps." Alone, Miss Finch wept, Potts comforting her. "We'll weather this, love." But sorrow masked deeper currents, innocence or cunning. Delving further, Miss Finch's backstory revealed hidden depths. Orphaned young after her mother's death from consumption, she'd lived quietly, her only extravagance the garden club. Her love for pots blossomed during shared committee work, stolen moments amid blooms. "He's kind," she told Marple privately, "sees beyond my plainness." Potts widowed himself, reciprocated, but Hargrove's interference threatened exposure. A discovered note: "Dearest R, meet me at dusk, L." Intercepted by Eleanor? Red herrings proliferated. Finch's typewriter matched anonymous notes' font. Coincidence, she claimed. A missing key from her board used for forgery. Village gossip. Finch seen arguing with Hargrove days before, tears streaming. Benson's records. Finch consulted him about heart flutters, love, or poison knowledge. Wilkins's tip. Lydia envied Eleanor's poise, wanted her position. Timothy. Aunt said Finch pilfered club funds, small amounts. Potts denied. Lydia's honest. Annie. Found her handkerchief in the shed weeks ago. Framin' or slip? Marple visited Finch's garden, noting poisonous herbs. Monkshood, belladonna. For study, Finch said. Knowledge is power, Marple replied. Sorrow deepened as Craddock found arsenic traces in Finch's herb-drying rack. Contamination? She sobbed. The chapter builds, sorrow veiling truth in Saint Mary Mead. Chapter 7. The Maid's Mystery. The 5th day after the poisoning at Rosewood Manor cloaked Saint Mary Mead in a restless quiet, the village caught in a limbo of suspicion and half-spoken truths. The morning mist had burned away, leaving a crisp autumnal light that illuminated the golden leaves drifting along the lanes. Yet the clarity of the day did nothing to dispel the murk of doubt that enveloped the community. The high street, usually alive with the chatter of market day, was subdued. Villagers moved with purposeful haste, their eyes darting as if expecting secrets to spill from the very cobblestones. The tragedy of Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's death had woven itself into the fabric of daily life, a dark thread that tugged at every conversation, from the butcher's counter to the church pews where Sunday prayers were tinged with unease. Rosewood Manor remained the epicenter of this unrest, its grand facade now a grim sentinel over gardens left untended, the roses drooping like mourners at a wake. The police tape around the gazebo had begun to fray, fluttering in the breeze like a warning flag, and Constable Slack's heavy tread could be heard patrolling the grounds at odd hours, his presence a reminder that justice was yet to be served. Inside the manor, the air was stale, the scent of lavender sachets now overpowered by the mustiness of a house closed off from its usual bustle. The kitchen, once the heart of the household, was now a place of scrutiny, its counters and cupboards scoured for clues to the poison that had felled its mistress. Annie, the young maid who had served the fatal tea, was the focus of the day's investigation. At 19, she was a slight figure with freckles dusting her nose and auburn hair tucked beneath a starched cap, her hands roughened from scrubbing floors and polishing silver under Mrs. Hargrove's exacting eye. Her demeanor was one of quiet efficiency, but beneath it lay a simmering resentment, a legacy of her family's troubled history with the Hargrove household. Her mother, Ellen, had been a maid at Rosewood 2 decades prior, dismissed for alleged theft, a charge that had left the family in penury, and Annie with a lingering grudge. Now, as Inspector Craddock summoned her to the manor's library for questioning, Annie stood with her shoulders hunched, her eyes flickering between defiance and fear. The library was a cavernous room, lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak furniture, its windows overlooking the neglected gardens. Inspector Craddock sat at a desk piled with papers, his notebook open, while Constable Slack stood by the door, his arms crossed like a sentinel. Miss Jane Marple, invited once more for her uncanny ability to see through the fog of human motives, occupied a wing-back chair near the fireplace, her knitting needles clicking softly, a metronome to the tense proceedings. Her presence was unobtrusive, yet her eyes missed nothing. The way Annie's fingers twisted the edge of her apron, the slight quiver in her voice, the quick glance she cast toward the door as if contemplating escape. "Annie," Craddock began, his tone measured but firm, "you were responsible for preparing the tea tray on the day Mrs. Hargrove died. Walk us through it." Annie swallowed, her freckles standing out starkly against her pale cheeks. "I did as always, sir. Filled the teapot with boiling water from the kettle, set out the cups, Mrs. Hargrove's special forget-me-not ones, added the tea leaves, Darjeeling, her favorite, took the tray to the gazebo, and they all helped themselves. Mrs. Hargrove poured her own cup, like she always did." Craddock leaned forward, his gray eyes piercing. "And you're certain no one tampered with the tray in the kitchen? You were alone?" "Yes, sir," Annie insisted, her voice rising slightly. "I mean, cook, Mrs. Potts, was there, but she was busy with scones. I checked the cups myself, spotless, as Mrs. Hargrove demanded. I'd never let anything slip past Miss Marple." Paused her knitting, her expression mild, but her gaze sharp. "Such diligence, Annie. It reminds me of my old maid, Cherry, who could spot a smudge on a teacup from across the room. But even the most careful hands can miss a shadow, can't they?" Especially in a busy kitchen, Annie's eyes darted to Miss Marple, a flush creeping up her neck. "I didn't miss nothing, miss. I swear it." Constable Slack produced an evidence bag, holding it up for all to see. Inside was a small silver locket, its surface engraved with a delicate rose. "Found this in your room, Annie, during a routine search. It's got a photograph inside, Mrs. Hargrove as a young woman. Care to explain?" Annie's breath caught, her hands clenching. It's a family heirloom, sir. My mother gave it to me, said it came from her time at Rosewood. I don't know why it's got her picture. I never opened it till recently." Craddock's brow furrowed. "Your mother, Ellen, worked here years ago, didn't she?" "Dismissed for theft, I understand. That must have left some bitterness." Annie's eyes flashed with sudden fire. "It wasn't true. Ma never stole a thing. They blamed her for a missing brooch, but it was found later, after she was sacked. Mrs. Hargrove never apologized, never gave her job back. We struggled, Ma and me, because of it." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Grudges are like pressed flowers, Annie. Kept close, they stay vivid. I recall a girl in St. Mary Mead, who held on to one for years, and it led to quite a to-do when it bloomed into action." Craddock pressed on. "So you had reason to resent Mrs. Hargrove, and you were seen near the garden shed last week, by Miss Finch, no less. The same shed where the arsenic was found." Annie's voice rose, almost shrill. "I was fetching a trowel for the rose beds. I didn't touch no poison. Miss Finch must have been mistaken or lying to cover herself." The accusation hung in the air, heavy as the mist outside. Mr. Reginald Potts, summoned to corroborate, entered the library, his mustache twitching with unease. "Annie's a good girl, Inspector. Worked hard for Eleanor, despite history. But I did hear Eleanor scold her once. called her careless, threatened to let her go. Miss Lydia Finch, arriving shortly after, paled at the mention. "I never lied, Annie. I saw you near the shed, that's all. I didn't mean to accuse Dr. Harold Benson, present to provide medical context," adjusted his glasses. "Arsenic poisoning requires intent, Inspector. Annie had access, yes, but so did everyone at the tea. The tray was out in the open, Mrs. Clara Wilkins dropping by uninvited with a basket of dahlias to brighten the gloom, snorted. Access? Annie was in and out of the kitchen like a bee. Could have slipped anything into that teapot. Annie's eyes welled with tears. I didn't. I served the tea, that's all. Mrs. Hargrove was mean, but not worth killing. Miss Marple's voice cut through gently. Mean employers leave scars, don't they? Like the vicar's maid who took to hiding things after too many harsh words. But hiding and harming are different matters. Craddock's notebook filled with scribbles as he catalogued the mountain evidence, or lack thereof. A search of the kitchen revealed no traces of arsenic, but a jar of rat poison was found in a cupboard accessible to staff. Annie's fingerprints were absent, but so were everyone else's, suggesting a careful hand had wiped it clean. Village gossip swirled like leaves in the wind. Mrs. Weatherby at the shop recalled Annie's mother, Ellen, cursing the Hargroves after her dismissal. Said they'd pay one day, she whispered to a customer, unaware Miss Marple was nearby, selecting a tin of biscuits. At the tea shop, old Mr. Pye muttered, "That Annie's got her mother's temper." Saw her slam a tray down once when Eleanor wasn't looking. Miss Marple, sipping tea with Mrs. Bantry later, mused, "Young girls like Annie carry burdens quietly, but resentment festers like blight. Still, murder requires a colder heart than hers seems to hold." Craddock's investigation deepened. He interviewed the cook, Mrs. Potts, who confirmed Annie's story, but added, "She was in a state that morning, nervous, kept checking the clock. Said it was her day off soon, but it felt off." A villager reported seeing Annie near the manor's back gate the evening before the tea, carrying something small, wrapped in cloth. The handkerchief, perhaps, or another red herring. Timothy Hargrove, questioned again, recalled, "Aunt mentioned Annie's cheek, said she answered back once too often." Potts confided to Craddock, "Annie overheard Eleanor planning to replace her with a new maid." "Might have pushed her over the edge," Miss Finch whispered. I saw Annie linger by the tea tray, adjusting cups. "Looked odd," Mrs. Wilkins added. "She's got motive, her mother's ruin." And access to the shed, Dr. Benson noted, "Arsenic could have been slipped into the tea leaves in the kitchen." Annie was alone long enough, yet Annie's denials held firm. "I loved my job, even if she was hard. I'd never risk it all." A search of her belongings uncovered a letter from her mother, kept in the locket's lining. "Never forgive the Hargroves, Annie. They took our dignity, motive, or sentiment." Miss Marple visited Annie at the manor's servants' quarters under the guise of offering a shawl. "You remind me of a girl in my village, wronged by a mistress but too proud to strike back openly. Pride can be a heavy load." Annie's eyes glistened. "I'm proud, miss, but not a killer. Someone's setting me up." As dusk fell, Craddock detained Annie for further questioning, her locket now in evidence. "We'll test it for residue," he said. Alone in her room, Annie clutched a worn photograph of her mother, tears falling. "Ma, I didn't do it. The maid's mystery deepened, her innocence tangled in a web of past wrongs and present suspicions. To unravel Annie's story further, consider her roots. Ellen, her mother, had been a spirited woman, dismissed from Rosewood at 25 after a silver brooch vanished, later found in a guest's luggage, but too late for reinstatement. Ellen's health declined, and she died when Annie was 12, leaving her daughter to fend for herself. Annie took the Rosewood job at 17, hoping to reclaim some dignity, but found only servitude under Eleanor's iron rule. The locket, a gift from Ellen, held a faded photo of a young Eleanor, perhaps a memento from happier days when Ellen admired her mistress, or a relic of betrayal. Its discovery raised questions. Why keep it hidden? Village whispers painted Annie as dutiful but defiant. A grocer recalled her buying rat poison months ago. For her lodgings, she'd said. A coincidence? Craddock found a diary entry in Annie's room. Mrs. H. is cruel, says I'm clumsy. Wish I could make her see anger or intent. Potts noted. Annie overheard Eleanor's will talks, knew Timothy was getting everything. Finch. She was near the tea tray when I arrived, looked startled. Wilkins. Always skulking about, that girl. Knows the manor inside out. Benson. Asked me about poisons once, said for a school project. Odd for a maid, Timothy. She glared at Aunt like she hated her. Red herrings abounded, a spilled tea tin in the kitchen, arsenic laced. A neighbor's claim Annie bought suspicious herbs, actually chamomile. Miss Marple, knitting by her fire, saw patterns. Young girls bear grudges like seeds in soil, waiting for the right moment to sprout. The chapter closes with Annie under scrutiny, her mystery a knot in the tangled skein of St. Mary Mead's Secrets. Chapter 8. Tangled Threads. The 6th day following the poisoning at Rosewood Manor found St. Mary Mead teetering on the edge of a collective unease, its tranquil lanes shadowed by a growing sense of disquiet. The morning broke with a fitful breeze that rustled the golden leaves, scattering them like whispered secrets across the village green. The air held the crisp bite of early autumn, laced with the faint, acrid tang of bonfires burning garden refuse, a fitting metaphor for the smoldering suspicions that consumed the community. The once inviting prospect of the flower show now seemed a distant memory, its absence a gaping wound in the village's rhythm, replaced by hushed gatherings at the tea shop and furtive glances over garden fences. Every villager, from the baker to the vicar, seemed to carry a theory about the poison in Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's teacup, and each theory wove another thread into the intricate tapestry of guilt and innocence. Rosewood Manor stood as a silent monument to the tragedy, its windows shuttered, its gardens neglected, the once vibrant roses now curling inward as if recoiling from the scandal. Inside, the grand drawing-room had become Inspector Craddock's command post, its polished surfaces cluttered with evidence bags, notebooks, and maps of the estate. The air was heavy with the must of disuse, the lavender sachets long since overwhelmed by the scent of ink and paper. Constable Slack, ever diligent, guarded the entrance, his notebook at the ready, while the manor's staff moved like ghosts, their tasks reduced to maintaining a semblance of order under the weight of scrutiny. Inspector Craddock, his square jaw set and his gray eyes weary from sleepless nights, pored over a growing pile of statements, each adding a twist to the labyrinthine case. The arsenic in the teacup, confirmed by the coroner's report, pointed to premeditation, but the web of motives and opportunities ensnared every suspect, leaving him grasping at threads that seemed to unravel as quickly as he seized them. Miss Jane Marple, invited once again to lend her peculiar insight, sat in her customary corner, her knitting needles moving with a steady rhythm that belied the whirl of her mind. Her shawl, a soft gray wool, draped over her shoulders, and her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, darted from face to face, noting the subtle tells of guilt, fear, or deception. The morning's inquiry began with a startling revelation from Mr. Reginald Potts, summoned to clarify his role in the garden club's finances. He stood before Craddock, his florid complexion heightened by agitation, his mustache twitching like a nervous insect. "Inspector," he began, his voice tight, "I must confess something, though it pains me. Eleanor discovered I'd been borrowing from the club funds, small sums, mind you, to cover greenhouse repairs after last spring's storm. She was blackmailing me, threatened to expose me unless I withdrew my orchids from—" The show Craddock's pen paused, his eyes narrowing. "Embezzlement, Mr. Potts? That's a serious charge, and blackmail gives you a motive to silence her." Potts mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "I know how it looks, but I didn't kill her. I was repaying the funds, slowly, discreetly. Eleanor knew that. She just wanted control, always did." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze soft but piercing. "Control is a powerful thing, Mr. Potts, like pruning a rosebush. Too much, and you stunt the growth. I recall a gentleman and saint, Mary Mead, who dipped into church funds for personal gain. It led to quite a tangle when discovered." Potts flushed, his voice rising. "I'm no thief, Miss Marple. It was a loan, and I meant to make it right. Besides, others had reasons to hate her, Clara Wilkins for one, with her precious dahlias." The questioning shifted as Dr. Harold Benson was called in, his demeanor composed, but his hands betraying a faint tremor as he adjusted his glasses. Craddock produced a letter found in Mrs. Hargrove's desk, hinting at an old affair. "Doctor, this suggests you and Mrs. Hargrove were intimate years ago. Ended bitterly, did it? Enough to drive you to poison?" Benson's face hardened, though his voice remained steady. "Ancient history, Inspector. Yes, we were close before her marriage. Youthful folly. She chose wealth over love, and I moved on. But lately she confided in me about her fears, anonymous threats, club rivalries. I urged her to take them seriously, but she laughed them off." Craddock held up a second item, an anonymous note accusing Benson of tampering with Hargrove's medication. "This was slipped under my door yesterday. Familiar handwriting?" Benson shook his head. "Not mine. Someone stirring the pot. Clara, perhaps, or that nephew." Miss Marple interjected gently. "Letters can be such deceits, can't they? Like the ones sent to poor Miss Blacklock in my village, designed to mislead. But they always reveal something about the sender." The threads tightened as Timothy Hargrove, the nephew, was summoned next. His polished exterior was fraying, his suit rumpled, and his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. "Inspector, I've debts, yes," he admitted, his voice low. "I needed Aunt Eleanor's money, urgently. She refused my last plea, said I'd squandered enough. But poison. I was in London. Check my train tickets." Craddock's gaze was unyielding. "Your tickets confirm arrival the morning after, but a villager claims to have seen you near Rosewood the evening before." Explained that Timothy's hands clenched. "Mistaken identity. I've a common face. Besides, Annie was skulking about. Ask her what she was up to." Miss Lydia Finch, trembling as she entered, added her own knot to the tangle. I found a forged letter in Mrs. Hargrove's study accusing Dr. Benson. It looked like my handwriting, but I swear it wasn't me." "Someone's trying to pin this on us all." Mrs. Clara Wilkins, arriving unbidden with a basket of apples, "from my orchard to lift spirits," chimed in with a smirk. "I planted false evidence against Potts myself, Inspector. Just a prank to divert suspicion after Eleanor accused my dahlias of cheating. But I didn't poison her." Craddock's patience frayed. "False evidence? That's obstruction, Mrs. Wilkins. And these notes, same paper as your stationery." Wilkins bristled. "Stolen? I keep my paper in the greenhouse. Anyone could have taken it." Annie, questioned again, stood rigid, her freckled face pale. "I saw nothing, sir. I served the tea, that's all. But I found a note in the kitchen warning Mrs. Hargrove to watch her cup. I thought it was a jest." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her voice soft. "Notes, letters, accusations, like weeds in a garden, they choke the truth. I recall a case where anonymous letters led to a terrible mistake. The writer thought they were clever, but they wove their own noose. Red herrings abounded, each suspect entangled further. A poisoned cake was found in Timothy's room at the manor, labeled for rats, but its arsenic matched the fatal dose. I bought it for my flat, he protested. A vial of digitalis in Benson's surgery bore no fingerprints, but was suspiciously placed. Finch's typewriter ribbon showed traces of ink used in a threatening note. Wilkins' greenhouse yielded a hidden stash of arsenic-laced fertilizer. For pests, she claimed. Annie's locket, tested, showed no poison residue, but deepened her connection to the Hargrove family. Craddock assembled the suspects in the drawing-room that afternoon, his voice heavy with frustration. "We've motives aplenty, money, love, rivalry, revenge. But evidence points everywhere, like a compass gone mad. Someone's playing a clever game, Miss Marple," knitting steadily, offered a quiet observation. "It's like knitting a scarf, Inspector. Pull one thread, and a pattern emerges, but tug too hard, and it all unravels. The truth lies in the knots, the small overlooked details. Potts, sweating, muttered, 'Look to Timothy, he's the heir.' Finch, tearful, pointed to Wilkins. Her jealousy was fierce. Wilkins accused Annie. The maid had access. Benson suggested Potts. His funds were at stake. Timothy blamed Benson. He knew her pills. Annie, near tears, whispered, 'I just did my job.' The web grew denser as village gossip fueled the chaos. Mrs. Price Ridley at the post office declared, 'It's a conspiracy, club members covering for each other.' Mr. Pye at the pub swore he saw Benson and Finch whispering in the churchyard. Mrs. Weatherby claimed Annie had bought arsenic for cleaning weeks prior. Miss Marple, visiting the manor's kitchen under the guise of consoling the staff, found cook, Mrs. Potts, kneading dough with vigor. 'Annie's been jumpy, miss,' said Mrs. Hargrove was planning to sack her. Found a note in the pantry. 'Beware the tea.' Burned it, thinking it nonsense. Marple's eyes twinkled. People burn what frightens them, like old Mrs. Bantry, who destroyed a letter that held a clue. Craddock, searching Hargrove's study, uncovered a diary entry. 'Potts is a thief, Finch a fool, Wilkins a cheat, Benson a dreamer, Annie a snake. One will betray me prophetic, or planted? Evening fell, the manor cloaked in twilight. Craddock, poring over evidence, felt the thread slipping. "Too many lies," he muttered. Miss Marple, knitting by her cottage fire, saw the pattern forming. "Each thread pulls another," she mused, "but the knot, the true killer, hides in plain sight." Delving deeper, the suspect's secrets interwove like ivy. Potts's embezzlement, £200 siphoned over a year, receipts hidden in his greenhouse. Benson's affair, letters from Eleanor, kept in a locked drawer, hinting at rekindled feelings she rebuffed. Timothy's debts, £5,000 owed to a London lender, threatening ruin. Finch's forgery, a letter in her hand, accusing herself, found crumpled in her bin, practice or frame-up. Wilkins' prank, a fake note accusing Potts, meant to distract, now backfiring. Annie's locket, a gift from her mother. But why Eleanor's photo? Villagers added threads. A neighbor saw Potts near the shed, carrying a vial. Another caught Finch dropping a paper in the manor's drive. Wilkins was spotted pruning foxgloves at dawn. Benson prescribed Hargrove's pills the day before. Timothy argued loudly with his aunt last visit. Annie lingered by the teapot, adjusting sugar. Craddock tested the cake. Arsenic, but stale, unused. The fertilizer, contaminated, but not the murder dose. The locket, clean, but its chain matched a scratch on the poison bottle. Miss Marple, visiting each suspect's garden, noted clues. Potts' orchids, sprayed with pest control. Finch's herbs, including belladonna. Wilkins' foxgloves, freshly cut. Benson's medicinal plants, labeled. Timothy's suitcase, with a hidden arsenic packet. Annie's window box, with nightshade. Human nature weaves a messy cloth, Marple thought, but the pattern always shows. The chapter closes with Craddock planning a confrontation, the tangled threads poised to unravel or strangle. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The 7th day after the poisoning at Rosewood Manor brought a restless energy to St. Mary Mead, as if the village itself sensed the approaching climax of the mystery that had upended its tranquil existence. The morning sky was a turbulent gray, heavy with clouds that seemed to press down upon the thatched roofs and winding lanes, mirroring the weight of suspicion that had settled over the community. The air carried the sharp tang of impending rain, mingled with the faint smoke of autumn bonfires, and the usual hum of village life, children playing, carts rattling to market, was subdued, replaced by a chorus of whispers that swirled like leaves in the gusty wind. The flower show, now a distant hope, was all but forgotten, its absence a silent rebuke to the discord that had taken root among the garden club members. Rosewood Manor stood at the heart of this storm, its ivy-clad walls looming like a fortress under siege, the gardens beyond the police tape wilting in neglect. The drawing-room, once a place of genteel gatherings, had become a crucible of truth and deception, its polished surfaces cluttered with evidence bags, photographs, and Inspector Craddock's meticulously annotated notebooks. The scent of lavender had long since faded, overtaken by the musty odor of a house closed off from the world, its windows shuttered against both the weather and prying eyes. Constable Slack patrolled the grounds with a dogged determination, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel, while the manor's staff moved with the quiet efficiency of those accustomed to serving under scrutiny. Inspector Craddock, his face etched with the strain of a case that seemed to multiply suspects with every question, had decided to gather all the key figures at Rosewood for a final confrontation. The room was arranged with deliberate formality, a semicircle of chairs facing a large oak table where Craddock stood like a conductor preparing to untangle a discordant symphony. The suspects, Mr. Reginald Potts, Miss Lydia Finch, Mrs. Clara Wilkins, Dr. Harold Benson, Timothy Hargrove, and Annie the maid, sat in uneasy silence, their faces a gallery of emotions: defiance, fear, resignation, and in some, a flicker of calculation. Miss Jane Marple, invited as an observer, occupied her usual corner, her knitting needles moving with a steady rhythm that seemed to anchor the room's tension. Her shawl draped softly over her shoulders, and her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, scanned the assembly with the calm assurance of one who had seen such dramas before. Craddock began, his voice firm but tinged with frustration. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been at this a week, and the truth remains elusive. Arsenic killed Mrs. Hargrove, that much is clear, delivered in her teacup, as she herself declared. But the how and why are tangled in a web of motives and misdirection. We've gathered you here to lay it all bare. Someone in this room knows more than they've admitted." He paced before the table, holding up a photograph of the fatal teacup, its delicate forget-me-not pattern now a grim relic. The cup bore only her fingerprints, suggesting the poison was added after it was poured. The teapot was clean, the tray untouched by foreign substances. Yet each of you had opportunity, and each has a motive. Mr. Potts, his florid face flushed, shifted uncomfortably. "This is absurd, Inspector. I've admitted to borrowing club funds. Eleanor was blackmailing me, yes. But I'd never resort to murder. Look to Timothy. He's the one inheriting." Timothy, his suit rumpled and his eyes shadowed, snapped back. "Me? I was in London, and you know it. Clara's the one with the poison plants. Her foxgloves could have done it." Mrs. Wilkins, her tweeds as sturdy as her demeanor, bristled. "Don't you dare, young man. My research is academic. Eleanor was a thorn, but I'd beat her fair and square at the show, not with arsenic. What about Lydia? She was right next to the tray, sniveling as usual." Miss Finch, her spectacles fogging with unshed tears, clutched her handkerchief. "I didn't. I was taking notes. Mrs. Hargrove poured her own tea. Annie was in and out of the kitchen. Ask her." Annie, standing rigidly by the door, her freckled face pale, protested, "I served the tray, that's all." Mrs. Hargrove checked every cup herself. "Maybe, Doctor. Benson's pills were tampered with. He was always fussing over her." Dr. Benson adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but strained. "My prescriptions were standard, and I've shown you the records. Eleanor's heart condition was managed, not fatal. Someone's framing us all, perhaps Clara's notes or Timothy's debts." The accusations flew like arrows, each suspect deflecting blame with practiced ease. Craddock raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough. We've heard the motives: Potts' embezzlement, Timothy's inheritance, Clara's rivalry, Lydia's love and shame, Annie's grudge, Benson's past, and these anonymous notes." He held up a stack of scrawled papers, pointing fingers at each of you, written on paper traced to Clara's greenhouse, Lydia's typewriter, even the Manor's stationery. Someone's orchestrating this chaos. Miss Marple set down her knitting, her voice soft but commanding attention. "If I may, Inspector? It's all about the teacup, isn't it? Who handled it last? Who had the moment to slip in the poison? In my experience, the simplest act can hide the darkest intent. This reminds me of Mrs. Price Ridley's cook, who seemed innocent as a lamb but knew far too much about her mistress's habits. The group tensed, their eyes darting to one another, seeking cracks in the facades they'd built. Potts mopped his brow, muttering, "It's madness. Someone's turned us against each other." Finch sobbed quietly. "I just wanted to love Reginald in peace." Eleanor made it impossible. Wilkins crossed her arms. "She made enemies like others make jam, effortlessly." Benson's hands trembled slightly. "She was frightened, you know. Those notes scared her more than she let on." Timothy clenched his fists. "Aunt was cruel, but I'd never hurt her." Annie whispered, "I did my job, nothing more." Craddock produced a new piece of evidence, a small vial found in the manor's pantry containing traces of arsenic and digitalis. This was hidden behind the tea caddy. No fingerprints, but it suggests a blend to confuse the symptoms. Who had access to both? The room erupted in denials, voices overlapping like a discordant choir. Potts pointed to Wilkins' greenhouse, Finch to Annie's kitchen duties, Wilkins to Benson's medical bag, Benson to Timothy's briefcase, Timothy to Finch's typewriter, Annie to Potts's greenhouse visits. Miss Marple's needles resumed, her voice cutting through the din. "Indeed, the clues are misleading, like village gossip. They point everywhere and nowhere. But the truth, like a well-tended garden, requires patience to uncover. This reminds me of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a tangle of lies hid a simple motive. We must look to the heart of it." Craddock nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. "We're close. The poison, the notes, the motives, they converge somewhere. I'll have each of you retrace your movements that day, minute by minute." As the questioning resumed, the storm outside broke, rain lashing the windows like a judgment. The suspects, trapped in their chairs, faced the gathering pressure, their secrets straining at the seams. To delve deeper into the storm's heart, consider the intricate threads woven thus far. Potts's embezzlement had been confirmed by bank records. £200 siphoned over a year, repaid in dribs. But Eleanor's blackmail had tightened the noose. His greenhouse log showed frequent purchases of arsenic-based pest control, easily accessed. Benson's past with Eleanor, letters found in her study, confirmed a youthful romance, ended when she chose wealth. A recent note from her herald, "Let the past stay buried," suggested renewed tension. His surgery held digitalis, and a vial of arsenic, labeled veterinary, raised eyebrows. Timothy's debts, verified by London creditors, totaled £5,000. A fortune. His train ticket proved his arrival post-murder, but a villager's sighting of a city man near Rosewood the prior evening muddied the waters. A hidden arsenic packet in his suitcase, for rats, he claimed, added fuel. Finch's love for Potts, confessed in her diary, was laced with desperation. "Eleanor will ruin us." Her typewriter matched anonymous notes, but a missing key suggested tampering. Her handkerchief, found near the poison, was possibly planted. Wilkins' rivalry, documented in club minutes, showed years of slights from Eleanor. Her greenhouse held digitalis and arsenic, and her stationery linked to notes. A torn page from her journal, blending toxins for effect, was damning, though she swore it was theoretical. Annie's grudge stemmed from her mother's dismissal, a wound reopened by Eleanor's threats to sack her. The locket with Eleanor's photo hinted at a deeper tie, perhaps a gift or stolen. Her kitchen access made her a prime suspect, yet her denials rang true. Red herrings multiplied, a poisoned apple in Wilkins' orchard meant for pests, a forged letter in Finch's bin mimicking her hand, a digitalis vial in Benson's bag, clean but suspicious, a cake in Timothy's room, stale, Annie's diary lamenting Eleanor's cruelty, Pot's greenhouse log noting a gift to Clara. Village gossip wove more threads. Mrs. Price Ridley saw Benson and Finch whispering. Mr. Pye heard Timothy arguing with Eleanor. Mrs. Weatherby caught Annie buying arsenic for cleaning. A neighbor spotted pots near the shed. Another saw Wilkins pruning foxgloves at dawn. Craddock's evidence table held the vial, the cup, notes, and diaries. Chemical analysis confirmed arsenic with digitalis traces, suggesting a sophisticated killer. The notes' handwriting varied, pointing to multiple authors, or one clever mimic. Miss Marple, visiting the manor's garden, noted footprints near the shed, men's boots, women's heels, a maid's flats. Like a dance, she mused, each step deliberate, but whose leads? As night fell, rain drumming, Craddock prepared to tighten the net. "Tomorrow we'll crack this," he vowed. Miss Marple, knitting by her fire, saw the storm's heart. The truth hides in the chaos, like a bloom among thorns. The chapter closes with the suspects on edge, the storm raging, and the truth tantalizingly close. Chapter 10. The Shocking Unveiling. The 8th day after the poisoning at Rosewood Manor dawned with a deceptive calm over St. Mary Mead, the turbulent clouds of the previous evening given way to a pale, washed-out sky that seemed to hold its breath. The village, though outwardly resuming its daily rhythms, carts rattle into market, children scampering to school, carried an undercurrent of anticipation, as if every soul sensed that the tangled web of suspicion was about to unravel. The air was crisp with the first true bite of autumn, scented with damp earth and the faint smoke of lingering bonfires, but the usual warmth of community had been replaced by a brittle tension. Whispers in the tea shop and post office had reached a fever pitch, with villagers dissecting every rumor, from the anonymous notes to the poisoned teacup, each hoping to glimpse the truth before it was laid bare. Rosewood Manor, its ivy-clad walls glistening with morning dew, stood as the stage for the final act of this grim drama. The drawing-room, now a familiar battleground of truth and deception, was arranged with meticulous care. Chairs in a tight circle around the oak table, where Inspector Craddock's evidence lay like relics of a war. Vials, letters, diaries, and the fatal forget-me-not teacup, its delicate pattern a mocking contrast to its deadly contents. The room smelled of old wood and faded lavender, the windows admitting slants of light that cast long shadows across the Persian rug. Constable Slack stood by the door, his notebook clutched like a talisman, while the manor's staff hovered in the background, their tasks suspended as the hour of reckoning approached. Inspector Craddock, his square jaw set and his gray eyes sharp, despite the strain of a week-long investigation, faced the assembled suspects. Mr. Reginald Potts, his florid face damp with perspiration, Miss Lydia Finch, her spectacles fogging with nervous tears, Mrs. Clara Wilkins, her tweeds defiantly crisp, Dr. Harold Benson, his hands betraying a faint tremor, Timothy Hargrove, his city Polish dulled by sleepless nights, and Annie, the maid, her freckled face pale but resolute. Miss Jane Marple, ever the quiet observer, sat in her corner, her knitting needles stilled for the moment, her shawl draped softly over her shoulders. Her eyes, bright and unyielding, swept the room, catching every glance, every fidget, every unspoken thought. Craddock began, his voice steady but charged with purpose. "We've reached the end of this labyrinth, ladies and gentlemen. Arsenic, laced with traces of digitalis, killed Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, delivered in her teacup during the garden club tea. Motives abound: embezzlement, inheritance, rivalry, love, revenge, betrayal. Anonymous notes, forged letters, and planted evidence have muddied the waters, but today we'll cut through the lies. Someone in this room is guilty." He held up the teacup, its porcelain gleaming under the chandelier. The poison was added after the tea was poured. Her fingerprints alone confirm it. The teapot was clean, the tray untouched. Opportunity narrows to those near the gazebo. But let's hear from an observer who sees more than most. All eyes turned to Miss Marple, who set down her knitting with deliberate care, her expression serene, but her voice carrying the weight of certainty. "If I may, Inspector? The teacup is indeed the key. Who handled it last? Who had the moment to slip in the poison? But more than that, we must consider why. In my experience, human nature follows patterns, like seasons in a garden. This reminds me of Mrs. Price Ridley's cook, who seemed innocent, but knew too much about her mistress's habits. The truth lies in the smallest details. The room tensed, the suspects shifting in their seats, their faces a gallery of apprehension. Potts mopped his brow, muttering, "This is preposterous. We're all being played." Finch dabbed her eyes, whispering, "I just wanted peace." Wilkins crossed her arms, snapping, "Get on with it." Benson adjusted his glasses, his voice tight. "Let's end this farce." Timothy clenched his fists, saying, "I'm no killer." Annie stood rigid, her eyes downcast. "I served, nothing more." Craddock nodded to Miss Marple, who rose, her frail figure commanding the room. "Let us begin with the obvious," she said, her tone gentle but incisive. "Dr. Benson, your knowledge of poisons and access to Mrs. Hargrove's medication make you a likely suspect. The arsenic in your surgery, the digitalis in her pills, perhaps you tampered with them, driven by an old love scorned." Benson paled, his hands trembling visibly. "Preposterous. I cared for Eleanor, yes, but I'd never harm her. My records are open. Check them." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "Indeed, your records are meticulous. Too meticulous, perhaps. But let us consider another. Miss Finch, your love for Mr. Potts, your fear of exposure, the handkerchief near the poison bottle. Mrs. Hargrove's threats to reveal your family's shame could have pushed you to desperate measures." Finch's sob broke the silence, her voice a wail. "No, I lost that handkerchief weeks ago. Someone planted it. I loved Reginald, but I'd never kill." Miss Marple nodded, unfazed. "Of course, my dear. And yet, the notes accusing others bear traces of your typewriter's ink. A frame or a slip? Let us move to Mrs. Wilkins. Your rivalry with Mrs. Hargrove was fierce. Your greenhouse a treasury of poisons. Your notebook detailed digitalis extraction, and your stationery matched the anonymous threats." Wilkins' face reddened, her voice booming. "Academic research. I'd beat Eleanor at the show, not with poison. Someone stole my paper." Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Timothy. "And you, Mr. Hargrove, with your debts and inheritance at stake. The arsenic in your suitcase, your presence near Rosewood, perhaps you slipped back from London earlier, then claimed Timothy's fists clenched. I was in London. The arsenic was for rats. Check my flat. Miss Marple turned to Annie. And you, Annie, with your mother's grudge and your access to the kitchen. The locket with Mrs. Hargrove's photo suggests a deeper tie, perhaps a secret worth killing to protect. Annie's eyes welled. It's Ma's locket. I didn't touch the poison, I swear. The room held its breath as Miss Marple paused, her eyes gleaming with insight. Each of you has a thread in this web, but the pattern is clearer now. The poison wasn't in the teapot, but added to the cup afterward. And the one who did it was Dr. Benson. A gasp rippled through the room. Benson leaped to his feet, his glasses slipping. Outrageous. I've no motive. My care for Eleanor was professional. Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice unwavering. But wait, that's what we were meant to think. The real killer is Miss Finch. No, even that's a ruse. The suspects froze, their eyes wide as Miss Marple delivered the shattering twist. It was Mrs. Hargrove herself who poisoned the cup, but not suicide. She intended it for Mr. Potts, her secret lover who spurned her for Miss Finch. In the confusion of serving, she drank from the wrong cup by mistake. The room erupted in stunned silence, broken by Potts' strangled cry. Lover? Me? That's absurd. Craddock, equally shocked, leaned forward. Miss Marple, explain. She nodded, her voice calm as a summer breeze. The clues were there, hidden in plain sight. Mrs. Hargrove's diary, found in her locked drawer, confessed her jealousy. Reginald betrayed me with that mouse Finch. He'll pay. She had arsenic in her medicine cabinet, prescribed for her own use, disguised as a tonic. The anonymous notes in her handwriting were meant to sow discord, deflecting suspicion. She planned to poison Potts during the tea, ensuring he drank from a specific cup. But in the bustle, Annie rearranging the tray, Finch taking notes, Wilkins arguing, she took the wrong one. Craddock produced the diary, its pages damning. Potts thinks he can discard me. The cup will teach him a prescription bottle, labeled for Hargrove, contained arsenic traces, matched to the murder dose. Miss Marple continued, but the true shock is this. Mrs. Hargrove isn't dead. Dr. Benson, her accomplice, administered a coma-inducing drug, not poison, to fake her death. They planned to frame Timothy for insurance money, then flee together. The arsenic was a red herring, meant to confuse a scream pierced the air from the staircase. Mrs. Hargrove, pale and trembling, was dragged into the room by Slack, who had found her hiding in the attic. "No," she shrieked. "How did you know?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Human nature, my dear. It's always the same in villages like ours. Your diary betrayed your heart, and Dr. Benson's. Tremor, guilt, not illness. I noticed the teacup's contents didn't match the coroner's initial report. Too little arsenic for death. A staged collapse, confirmed by the manor's hidden laudanum stash. Craddock, recovering, signaled Slack. "Arrest them both." Hargrove struggled, her voice venomous. "It was for love. Reginald betrayed me." Benson slumped, defeated. "I loved her too much to refuse." The suspect, stunned, watched as the pair was led away. Potts stammered, "I never knew." Finch wept. Wilkins muttered, "Madness." Timothy sighed. Annie stared in disbelief. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her voice soft. "Love and greed, like weeds, choke even the finest gardens." The storm broke, rain cleansing saint. Merry Mead as truth emerged from shadow. To fully unravel this unveiling, consider the intricate clues woven through the tale. Hargrove's diary, locked in her desk, detailed her obsession with pots. A secret affair begun after her husband's death ended when he turned to Finch. "He'll regret choosing her," she wrote. The arsenic, prescribed for nerve tonic, was stockpiled, its bottle hidden in her room's false panel. Anonymous notes, traced to her fountain pen, aimed to frame others, Potts, Finch, Wilkins, while deflecting scrutiny. Benson's role emerged in medical discrepancies. The coroner noted minimal arsenic, suggesting a non-lethal dose. A laudanum vial in his bag, matched to Hargrove's coma, sealed his complicity. Their plan: stage death, collect insurance, frame Timothy, flee to France. Red herrings, Finch's handkerchief, Wilkins' notebook, Timothy's debts, Potts' funds, Annie's locket, were distractions, some planted by Hargrove. The locket, a gift from Ellen to Eleanor years ago, was kept by Annie, unaware of its significance. Village whispers fueled confusion. Mrs. Price Ridley saw Hargrove pacing at night, alive, plotting. Mr. Pye noted Benson's late visits. Mrs. Weatherby caught a woman's shadow in the attic. Craddock's evidence, diary, laudanum, notes, confirmed Marple's theory. Footprints in the attic matched Hargrove's shoes. Benson's prescription records showed laudanum overuse. Miss Marple, reflecting, saw parallels to a saint. Mary Mead case, a staged death for gain, undone by a spinster's eye. The chapter closes with justice served, saint. Mary Mead exhaling, the flower show rescheduled, and Marple knitting, ever watchful.